Thank you everybody for coming. I'm very excited to see so many of you joining us today. I'll first give the floor to Professor Costea just to say her hello from on behalf of ARA. So Professor Costea, you have the floor now.
Hello everybody. I'm Ileana Costea, Interim President of ARA, the American Romanian Academy of Arts and Sciences, and I'm talking to you from Los Angeles, while Ionut's Geana, as you probably have found out by now, he talks to us from Bucharest.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. If you are in Romania, it's good evening. It is my great pleasure to have you all at this very interesting Zoom event. As you can see from the background I just put, this is the 5th Zoom ARA 2021 event. We already had some other very interesting events. The first one was in March, 17th of March 2021, with Ana Blandiana, a famous contemporary Romanian poet, and it was called Together with all of us, and it was about Ana Blandiana in literature and movie. The literature, we talked about her new book, Sora Lume, and about a book that I conceived with 18 poems by her from my native land, A4. The book is called God on Roller Skates, and a very interesting new movie based on a short story by Ana Blandiana.
Proiecte de trecut, a story that takes place during the horrible communist deportation in the Weigand plain, really the Siberia of Romania, in 1952.
The movie being made by Andrei Zinca, and it's called So What's Freedom? Și atunci ce e libertatea? The second event was in May, and it was about a pilot and a skydiver from the period between the two world wars, Smaranda Brescu, and it was co-organized with the ARPIA, the Aviation Association in Cluj-Napoca, which is called Smaranda Brescu. The third one was organized by Oana Leonte, who is now this morning with us, a board member of ARA, and she organized this Zoom event about Gheorghe Mateescu, a chemist, very famous professor of chemistry. And then we had memorial, let's say, celebration of life of Professor Corduneanu, a president of ARA before my time. So welcome to this very interesting event, and I am looking forward to listen to your interesting presentations.
Thank you very much, Professor Costea. Now, this workshop is organized by ARA in collaboration with the Romanian Academy's Institute of Linguistics in Bucharest, and it's part of a project that it's currently in implementation at our institute through TThe. That's a big name that gives us money for research, and that's a very good thing. The project, I mean, I will tell a bit more when we take our turn, but just an organizational thing. So we have 20 minutes for talks and then 10 minutes for discussions, and these 10 minutes will be after each talk. So we will have like a closing session at the end, let's say, with general impressions, but specific questions will be asked after each presentation. Now I would like to give the floor to Zvezdana Vârzic. So she has serious contributions in the field of Istro Romanian. She has worked extensively, and she's also from the community. So she's very, let's say, in the field of this Istro Romanian. You can share your screen now if you want, Zvezdana.
Hello to everyone from New York again. Very nice. I'm very honored actually to be here. So I would like to thank first Ionut Geana for inviting me to give this presentation. I would also like to thank the American Romanian Academy for Arts and Sciences for giving me the honor to be here, as well as the Romanian Academy's Institute of Linguistics. So let me start. I will be talking about infinitival clauses, and Ionut said that's okay. So I apologize in advance to everyone because this talk will be rather technical and perhaps a little bit dry for those who are not strictly interested in syntactic issues. But actually, the phenomenon of infinitival clauses is quite important in the study of Istro Romanian, but also other varieties of Daco-Romance, modern Romanian, Aromanian, and Megleno-Romanian, because there's a significant difference, as you will see, between Istro Romanian and these other Daco-Romance varieties with respect to the use of infinitives, and then there's this issue of why that is the case. So just to give you a quick overview, I will talk about the distribution of infinitival clauses in Vlashki, Zejanski. Those are speakers' names for the language that in linguistics is known as Istro Romanian. And I will focus in particular on infinitival verbal complement clauses. I will provide a comparison to modern Romanian structures that are equivalent to infinitival clauses in Romanian and Caragiu Croatian. So Caragiu is a local dialect of Croatian that is spoken in surrounding villages, neighboring villages to those where Istro Romanian is spoken, and that is the most important contact language. And then at the end, I will give some sort of tentative consideration regarding issues of language contact. And I hope I can do all that in 20 minutes. So in terms of my data, the analysis is based on corpus data, both mine, data I have collected together with my collaborators over many years, and then also Kovacic's data. So those data are naturally occurring data, mostly from narrative examples by means of translation from Croatian. And, you know, obviously, that kind of approach can have its problems. The description kind of represents both regional dialects of the language, so both Vlashki and Zejanski. And I use a descriptive approach, but I do also use some basic constructs of generative grammatical theory that have become standard in the study of infinitives. So the basic properties of infinitives in Istro Romanian, there are 7 classes of verbs and infinitival endings. The first 4 classes are Daco-Romance, those that exist also in other Daco-Romance varieties, and categories 5 to 7 are specific to Istro Romanian, and actually all borrowed word verbs belong to those classes. Number 7, class 7, exists only in the Zejanski dialect. In terms of other properties of infinitives, they are invariable. They are not used with particle or preposition a, and there's no distinction between short and long infinitives in Istro Romanian, only former exists. So now I will start looking at the distribution. This is a long, at least one example in each category. So just so you get a sense of the language and the structures. And I have to say, this is, I'm not a native speaker of Vlashki, so this will be a little bit of a broken Vlashki. So in main clauses, infinitives can appear in instructions and imperatives like hiti u razgoru, pure preskont, or nufi poreden, as narrative infinitive, sakasera, obaveznost kudavesa. It can also, infinitives can also appear as subjects in copular sentences, such as ora, arapemintu, jetejek lucru, in impersonal constructions with fi triba, fi lahko, fi drag, fi teško, fi mai bire, for instance, triba duce cafe. As a part of subject relative in existential construction, numa vucire neganei, Then as part of the predicate in the construction phi plus infinitive, for instance, omule nu se vedea, as an object, avea plus relative infinitive clause, n-am avut se înceea învești. The next set of examples show how infinitives or infinitival clauses are used as verbal complements. So that's the main focus of the presentation. So after auxiliary verbs, we get infinitives, and really those are the forms of the verb vrea, want. So in the future tense, in present conditional, in past conditional, the infinitive follows the auxiliary. So for instance, ala kerem yikosi, or Zejanski, nu pok mai zamisli keresho toa. Then past conditional, resh fost amnanda tunčan šušnjevice mere. Then the next category is infinitives after modal verbs like puta, morei, nuketeza. And again, I'll read one example for each category.
Să-i spun repede Ileanei să vi-l trimită.
Ja, n-a putut crede. That's the verb puta. With morei, mores amna. After nuketeza, nu se cătează prebetervikei. The next category are spectral verbs. So infinitives can be used with spectral verbs like poșni, ujei, fini. Și iom poșnit sopi is one example. With causative verbs as well, infinitives can follow them. So face, lăsa, da, dozvoli, ajuta, iete lăsa copei a lui pole. But here with causative verbs, variation exists, and this sentence, iete lăsa copei a lui pole, can also be expressed with a finite clause introduced by Neca. So you can also say iete lăsa neka copeș a lui pole. So that's a finite structure here in variation with infinitive. Then after volitional verbs like vrea, voli, želi, we can also have infinitives. So moaio, eu vrei să înșcolam is one example. After other desiderative verbs like fei, obeci, misli, provei, kavto, for instance, misles veri. But here again, we have variation with finite clauses. So misles veri, this example alternates with the finite structure. So misles ke voi veri can be said as well. Motion verbs, veri, mere, amna, also can be followed by the infinitive. So văcam verit ajuta cosi. Psychological verbs, dopadit misav kuhei. Perception verbs, nu n-am văzut oamenii hrănicoali. Verbs of mental perception, utoată-mi zice lenone cea storie. After verbs of knowing, like ști, și am știut slovele pisei. So these are the examples for verbal complements. Infinitives, otherwise, can also follow, can also be combined, so to say, with nouns and adjectives. That is, they can be complements to these parts of speech. And in that case, they are introduced by de or za, complementizes de za, conjunctions de za. So with nouns, one example is veritav, o želja de face nuște. With adjectives, și și palinkele a fost pure de cânta. So it can also, infinitives can also appear in relatives which seem to have empty heads, like fost zavinde na metri or mai av fost rodi. In adjective clauses, after infinitives also appear, and then they are introduced by various conjunctions, de za, moance de, fer de, na mesto de, or în locul de. By the way, I don't think I mentioned this before, but there is this alternation, a difference between the two dialects The is used as a complementizer in Zejanski, and sta is predominant or even exclusively used in Vlashki. So yeah, one example, eu m-am la lompă pus de mai bine vedea. Okay, and then there are other examples. I think I'm gonna have to skip a little so that I can get to the end. So infinitive, so just to summarize what I've said so far, infinitival clauses as verbal complements are used with control verbs in either subject or object control structures. When the main clause subject or object and the embedded subject are not coreferential, that is, they're not pointing to the same person, infinitival clauses are not possible. Instead, finite clauses with either the complementizer neka or ke are used. And neka is an imperative or optative marker in main clauses. It's been borrowed from Croatian, Croatian, where it has a similar distribution. In embedded contexts, neka follows causative verbs, volitional, and directive verbs, and there is some variation there. It also has other uses. So for instance, it introduces purpose clauses and follows some expressions such as fi mai bine, where it is in variation again with ke. And ke is used in all other contexts. So ke is very similar to the English that. Interestingly, double complementizer constructions are also possible. So I have some examples, and I haven't really focused on that at all, but I'm just mentioning it as something that's really interesting. You can have double complementizer constructions so that you can have ke and neka together, but also the other order neka ke appears. And actually, this reminds me of something I've done a long time ago when I was still a graduate student with regard to Croatian or Serbian, where such structures appear as well. So, except that in that case, we can have the same, something that sounds like a same complementizer, da, twice in a row. So I don't think I'll be able to read all of the examples with neka, but maybe just one. For instance, after causatives, lasa, the sentence would be jete lasa neka kopeš a lui polje, right? Not ke kopeš, but neka kopeš. But it is this example, in fact, we said before, it is in variation with the infinitive. And then with directives like neputi, jetire neputita neka merin kodru would be one example. With ke, for instance, after volitional verbs like vrea, when there is disjoint reference, we use ke. So vres ke me fil în meța conatu. With the desiderative, ufei me che voi veri, where again there's variation with the infinitive. After psych verbs, so piace-me che e cuha. Epistemic verbs, credo che voi veri, whether joint or disjoint reference. Verbs of knowing, știu că știe mușat cânta, when there is disjoint reference, and so on. So as I said, I'm going to have to skip a little bit to keep my presentation within 20 minutes. So to summarize all this, it's a lot of information, I realize. So I apologize for that, but let me try to go summarize it for you. So infinitival clauses appear as main clause subjects, predicates, and or objects. They are also complements to many, but not all control verbs. Implied subjects of infinitival clauses are co-referential with the main clause subjects and with some verbs, and in case of some verbs with the objects. When they are complement of nouns and adjectives, infinitival clauses are introduced with a preposition de or za, depending on the dialect. De or za also appears in adverbial clauses, whether alone or in complex conjunctions, and in some constructions. When the subject of the infinitive is not co-referential with the main clause subject or object, the dependent clause is finite and introduced by either neka or ke. And with directive and epistemic verbs and verbs of saying, infinitival clauses are not possible. Infinitival clauses do not appear in these constructions, so-called phrasing constructions. Like in English, that would be, I want him to come. So this is a summary table that summarizes only the distribution of infinitival verb complement clauses according to the semantic and syntactic type of the main verb in Istro Romanian, Jacobian Romanian, and modern Romanian. I realize my next goal is to introduce also information from Old Romanian now that a lot of good information is available on Old Romanian. So the language that was spoken between the 16th and 18th century. When the first document's available, right? It was spoken much earlier as well. So again, let's look at this distribution quickly. So we see that Istro Romanian and Jacobian Romanian, that's the third and the fourth column, share a lot of properties. So actually in most contexts, they behave exactly the same, and there's only one context with directives, where Istro Romanian doesn't seem to allow infinitives, infinitival clauses, but they are possible variably though in Jacobian Croatian. And then in modern Romanian, the situation is quite different, and the use of infinitives is much more restricted. So again, to summarize, this distribution of infinitival verbal complement clauses in Istro Romanian and Jacobian Romanian are very similar, including when it varies, except for one class of verbs. But the distribution in Jacobian, Croatian in infinitival seems to be wider also in other types of uses, not just with regard to verbal complement, as you saw in the table. So there are additional adverbial clauses and impersonal constructions in which Jacobian Croatian uses infinitival clauses, but they don't seem to be allowed in Istro Romanian. Both languages use infinitives in control constructions, whether subject to subject, control context, and some object to subject context. And there's, with some variation and exceptions, they do not allow nominal subjects in infinitive clauses, and the use of infinitival clauses in phrasing constructions is not possible. So modern Romanian has a much more reduced distribution of infinitives as verbal complement. Even in the context where infinitival clauses are allowed to be used, this usage is variable, and finite clauses can be used in alternation. And I used one source for this information. I am aware of the fact that there is variation among different regional Romanian dialects with respect to the use of infinitives. And so at the end, I would like to give some consideration, really tentative thoughts on language contact in Istro Romanian. Really, as I said, in a tentative way. So it's been noted by many scholars before me, many Romanian scholars like Pușcariu or Coteanu, and others, that Istro Romanian has undergone extensive contact interference from Jacobian Croatian. I have two quotes here from Kovačec, who has worked for decades on the language as well, who points to the syntactic convergence between Istro Romanian and Jacobian Croatian. If one excludes the placement of personal pronouns, complete sentences and texts can be translated word by word, or more correctly, phrase by phrase, from Istro Romanian to Jacobian and vice versa. The other quote is, the fact, which refers to the separation between Istro Romanian and other Daco-Roman varieties, a relevant point as well. The fact that in either isolated Romanian varieties south of Danube, in Aromanian and Maghlino-Romanian varieties, these phenomena, and he talked about word order there, are much more rare, should not be explained only by historical and societal circumstances, but also by the fact that these varieties were in contact with languages whose morphological and syntactic structure is much closer to the one in Romanian, that is, with the languages Balkansprachbund. And so how could we kind of put the situation with Romanian in the context of the discussion about language contact more broadly? So one idea, possibility is to suggest that Istro Romanian seems to fit Thomason and Kaufman's category 4 of borrowing, which includes moderate structural borrowing. For them, borrowing is a specific kind of contact-induced interference, which proceeds from L2 to L1. In this case, that would be from Croatian Caragiu-Marioțeanu to Istro Romanian, under circumstances of language maintenance and extensive long-term bilingualism, and results in extensive borrowing of functional morph elements, morphosyntax and syntax, in addition to continued borrowing of the lexicon. Another topic, another concept that is relevant and that I mentioned already is the concept of convergence. So Hickey, for instance, suggests or mentions two possible meanings of convergence in contact theory. So one is that parallel structures exist in two languages and internal and external forces converge to produce the same results. So retention of similar features, maybe loss of others that are not. And the other sense is two languages become more similar in structure, usually by one language approximating to the other. And what would be possible examples of convergence in Istro Romanian? These are topics that were discussed by other researchers. And I took these examples from Kovacev's 1998. And these are not all examples that do exist. I just give two for each. So there were processes of simplification, convergence which led to simplification, convergence which led to complexification. Both is possible. So the loss of the subjunctive, aorist, supine, imperfect in Zejanski, the loss of distinction between definite and indefinite marking on feminine nouns were referred to as examples of convergence that led to simplification. Then there has been complexification. So, for instance, morphologically expressed verbal aspect is one famous example of addition of a new morphosyntactic category, and then neuter gender is another one. And then there are also changes that do not seem to fit under convergence, at least at first sight. As I said, these are all very tentative thoughts. So, for instance, loss of genitive dative case for nouns and adjectives in Vlashki. You know, it doesn't seem like that should be explained by using the term convergence, because we know that Caragiu Croatian has extremely rich case paradigms. So, how about the infinitive? Why is Istro Romanian so different from modern Romanian and Aromanian and Magdalena Romanian with respect to the use of infinitives? One reason, one possible explanation is what Kovacev's explained, what Kovacev's suggested in that quote, which I read at the beginning with reference to word order. So with the early separation of Istro Romanian from Daco-Romance, Istro Romanian avoided the gradual replacement of the infinitival construction with a finite construction, which to varying extents happened in Balkansprachbund languages, including other Daco-Romance varieties, due to widespread multilingualism in the area and the influence of languages such as Greek. The process of becoming more similar to Caragiu Croatian, so convergence in both cases could have included retention of some existing forms of infinitival use that were used at a point of contact, loss of others, and introduction of some that did not exist before. In other words, Istro Romanian use of infinitive today can only partially reflect an older state of the language or an old state of Daco-Romance. So this is just kind of an idea about the necessity to approach historical explanations carefully. Maybe just a warning to myself rather than others, because it is kind of also quite obvious. So to end this presentation, and I'm sorry that I'm rushing through, it would be, and I would like to do that, it would be interesting to look into cases of variation in the use of the infinitive in Istro Romanian and get a sense, and we saw that there is variation there, and that it is also appearing in Chekavian Croatian. And by doing that, to get a sense perhaps of which way the IR infinitive, the Istro Romanian infinitive, is going, due to internal as well as external forces, especially in the context of an increasing influence of Standard Croatian. And the use of infinitives in Standard Croatian is different from the use of Chekavian Croatian. So it is allowed in fewer contexts than it is in Chekavian Croatian. So this is it from me. I hope I managed to stick to the schedule. So I would like to say hvala, mulțumesc, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zvezdana, for this very interesting presentation. Now the floor is open for questions and discussions. Technically 4 minutes, but in case it gets hot, let's say, we can get a few more minutes. So if anyone would like to ask Zvezdana or make some comments, questions.
I would like to ask something. Looking, you know, at the speed you went with all the presentation, I feel sorry that I cannot read everything. Very, very interesting. But the question that I have is Istro Romanian origin. Maybe Romanian and Istro Romanian have the same background, and due to the geographic area and the influences from Croatian and the neighbors, I see also a lot of Slavic words in Croatian. How would you comment on this?
Yes, thank you for your question. And I apologize again for the speed of the presentation, but there was simply no other way to do it within 20 minutes. I know that's not the best way to do it. Yeah, of course, Istro Romanian and Romanian are related languages. They have common origin in the proto-language that we in linguistics refer to as Daco-Romance. So it's one of the branches of Daco-Romance, just like Aromanian and Megleno-Romanian, and then Daco-Romanian is. There are 4 branches of Daco-Romance. So they are closely related. However, because Istro Romanian kind of detached itself from this Daco-Romance core many centuries ago, and we don't know exactly when that happened because there are no documents pointing to that, but suggestions by linguists have been anytime between the second part of the first millennium to the 11th century, for instance, that suggestions that this separation happened. And so Istro Romanian has been under influence of Slavic, and in particular, various Croatian varieties of Croatian, and then in the last 5-6 centuries, varieties of Chekavian Croatian for a long time, right? So under those circumstances, we expect that a minority language, a small linguistic enclave that Istro Romanian always was, will fall under the contact influence of the neighboring languages or varieties. And it did. So as you saw, as you noticed very well, there are many Slavic or Croatian, specifically Croatian, Chakavian Croatian words, dialectal Croatian words in the language. If we took the vocabulary as a whole, maybe 60–70% of the words even. In the core vocabulary, much fewer, but even the core vocabulary, the basic vocabulary of Istro Romanian has a lot of borrowings. So for instance, the body part words, some of them are of Croatian origin as well, even though we don't expect that these basic words would be borrowed from another language so easily. But that's due to this long-term contact between the two languages.
That means about 70% is Slavic and only 30% has very, how to say, very close relations with Romanian vocabulary?
Well, this is this is a rough estimate, I have to say, of large proportion, that's safer to say a large proportion, in the basic vocabulary, frequent words that are used on an everyday basis, much less.
Thank you very much.
Definitely, so Istro Romanian is definitely a Romance at the core, both lexically and grammatically.
Thank you.
Maybe we have time for another tiny short question.
If I can make a remark on the way to write phonetically phoneme in Istro Romanian. This I mean, ea in Istro Romanian is written like exactly a Polish letter, e with a comma, Sevilla. In Polish, this is pronounced like in French. And this is not so important. It is only a way to express phoneme in this Istro Romanian language. But I want to tell you that I love the Croatian language very much. Ja smatram što hrvatski jezik je najljepši slavonski jezik. I su mnogo rather many words in Croatian and in Romanian are simply identical. I give 3 examples. Jeftin, cheap. Izvor, in Romanian, izvor, well. And veverica, squirrel, is exactly the same in Croatian and in Romanian. And there are many other words, but it's not time enough to mention them now.
Yes, we're already running late.
It's very interesting, your study, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your interesting comment. Yes, the relationship between Istro Romanian and Croatian and Romanian and other Slavic varieties, it has been very close for many centuries, and there are many interesting interactions between the two. So thank you for your comment. Thank you for loving Croatian too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, just a quick intermezzo. So I'll give the floor back to Professor Costea to introduce Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu, the Consul General of Romania in Los Angeles. He managed to log in the meantime, and we're sorry there was a miscommunication between us. So thank you again very much, Zvezdana. Okay, so Professor Costea, you have the floor now.
Yes, good morning again, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and for very revealing aspects about Romanian and Istro Romanian language. Thank you for your comments also, Oana and Professor Alexandru Caragiu. I want to introduce the Consul General of Romania in Los Angeles, Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu. I must say, this morning, at the beginning of our session, when Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu was not here, I was very surprised because this consul has been the best consul we ever had in Los Angeles. He always keeps his promises. He always is present. He makes a point, I'm sure, he makes a point to give, to encourage the Romanian community and the associations. So I said, my God, how come he confirmed last night and he's not here? So Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu, accept our apologies for miscommunication, but I want everybody to know that you are wonderful and that I appreciate you very much. And not only I hear very good words about you from many, many people. And behind me, you see a background. The background is from a celebration that they do in Trieste, the Istro Romanian for Easter. And because Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu was a consul in Trieste, I figured out that we should put this picture, which in the background shows the images of the buildings in Trieste. Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu, I must say that you have more people in the audience than if you were speaking at the very beginning. So thank you for joining us. And here you are, you have the stage.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by the introduction done by Professor Costea. Thank you very much for your wonderful words. I think I don't deserve them, but however, the invitation honored me, and of course that I was attracted from the very beginning. I would like to congratulate all the organizers, the American Romanian Academy of Art and Science, Professor Geana, and everybody that has been involved in this wonderful event. Everybody knows that linguistics are one of my, it remained one of my hobbies. So it was my first university degree, but I remained attached to this wonderful science. About the Istro Romanians, I'm sorry that we couldn't communicate before. Maybe it would have been great to have with us connected Enrico Curtis, the president of the Italo-Romanian Association Decebal. He simply dedicated his last 20 years for making a research about Istro Romanians, and he also wrote a history of Istro Romanians in the Istria Peninsula. He started in Trieste. Of course, he lives in Trieste, and he continued his research on the whole Dalmatian coast. As a matter of fact, if you are going to look on the internet, on YouTube, you're going to find a documentary, a very interesting one of 20 minutes. Its name is Chibi and Chiribiri, Istro Romanians, with great interviews, not only of Enrico Curtis, but also of some of Istro Romanians from Croatia and Trieste. Maybe the universities in Croatia do know Mr. Curtis for his work, and I strongly recommend you to contact him because he has a lot of elements that could help your projects about Istro Romanians. Thank you for the presentation that I heard. I'm sorry for the debacle, a technical one. I would have been present from the very beginning because it's very interesting. And I also thank my colleague, Honorary Consul General in Phoenix, Arizona, Professor Orlich, for being here with us. Hello, Professor. So I congratulate you for bringing into discussion this kind of cultural connections that happens in Europe. They happen because practically we share a civilization there. And I heard the question how these Istro Romanians got into that region. They were shepherds, and they practiced their work, and at a certain moment they decided to settle there, and they continued to preserve their culture and their traditions and the most part of their language, As a matter of fact, we are talking about no more than 100, 150 people that currently speak Istro Romanian in those regions. The community is about 500, 600, but unfortunately, young people do not use anymore the language. Sometimes they use it in their families. And I think that the support of the Croatian state, and not only, also of the Romanian state, is of utmost importance in order to preserve this beautiful element of civilization, of culture that continues to exist in those regions. Estonians love their place, but also they love their traditions and language. And I had the opportunities of meeting some of them in Trieste, but not only, also in Croatia, a beautiful country that I love, and I'm looking forward to visiting it again. So from here, from Los Angeles, I would be happy to help you, Professor Geana, and everybody that is involved in this project, to make the connection with Enrico Curtis and with the professors at the University of Trieste that have been involved in this kind of research. And they did a great job. Again, congratulations for your initiative and for your supporting this cultural connection between people that represent more countries and more traditions in Europe that has been united since then. You see, European Union did not invent a united Europe. Europeans were together for a very long time, have been together for a very long time. And I'm looking forward to listen to the presentations that are going to be done today. Thank you very much for inviting me. An honor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu. And I forgot to tell one thing, everybody, and I was waiting for you to first speak because there is an additional thing I want to tell you about Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu. Not only is he present at almost all the events of the community in Los Angeles and the Romanian activities, but he always makes his speech very appropriate to the event. And I think you are convinced by the way in which he talked about Istro Romanians, how appropriate his speech is. But this is not just one time, it's every time that he speaks. Thank you very much, Dr. Cosmin Dumitrescu.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now we're running a bit behind, but let's move please to the next presentation. So we're here, Viviana Brkaric and Robert Doricic, about Vlashki and Zejanski language in the cultural kaleidoscope of Istria. I'm sure we've all listened to very interesting observations and interventions. So is it Viviana or Robert? Okay, yeah.
The presentation is in Istro Romanian or Vlashki, we call it Vlashki language.
Perfect.
Eu veganei de uma família de contrabando. Contrabando se lucrat de la 1930 per la capitulație de toale. Și poclevăi ratoar scurt film care are în nostru interpretacijski centar Vlaški puti și vei vedeți toți zaveri în Šušnjevica și vedea nostru centru. Vutam srića kam živitam familija i ova skupa posta 4 generacije. Me pranona, nona, moja, čoče, sora și eu. Živitam in Rica, ali custorile de male none, vsaka zim posta în Istrie. Când zic în Istrie, mislesc prenosolo. Când am fost mica, mie nosilo posta mai mușat loc pre lume. Unosilo am fost toate sâmbete și dumirică, toate ferii în vara și în iarna. Igrajt cu prijateljice și prijatelji, trălit prin sinocoșe, scadavajce în potok, toți mirom am fost in natura. Čavota inka tos prin coasele în nosilo și în Šušnjevice, în pošte, în butiga, în oštarije ganajta Vlaški. Cu mire ganajta po hrvatski, ka mislitke nu știu ganaj Vlaški, când bevese în Rica. În ma coasa Vlaški sa ganajt sakazi, nona, prenona și mečoče, întrusire toți mirom ganajta Vlaški, posebi când sa ganajt nu știu ce feciorii nu cu tegu avzi. Din šam inka mai vretenățat Vlaška limba. Prenona posta din Brdo, de la Piscala și 18 ani, când s-a mărituat în Noselo cu Mario Lubene. Buta figliu Ive și filia Manona Ljuba. Amândouă rămasă rano udovice și a Pokle živit cu noi. Male none nu mi-a citat știorițele din libri, nego mi-a spuravait ștoriile de cum s-a moante teșko živit, cum s-a el igrait, ce-a mâncat, ce-a lucrat și cum a șcărțeit. Mai mult mi-a fost interesate știorițele de strigă și de contraband. Toți miram am întrebavait nona și prenona cum a fost când s-a lucrat contrabandul. Ma ce te-am vete 100 vote spuravait. Ce nu te dosti, zicea ea, ali Pokle se ne smija și poșnită spuravait. După prva gvera, Istria și Pokle Rica pripadita su Tolije. Tolija vruta žvilupai turizmu în Kvarnerska pokrajina, ce s-a chemat provincia del Carnaro, pa proglasita zona franca, per deduație. Zona franca del Carnaro, de 1930 leuani. Zona a fost a prestrins teritorii de la Rica per la moștenička droga și matuli. În Șușnevița și ocolița, narodul lucrata campania și goita blaga, cu ce a fost a teșko prihrani mare familie, fost a mare mizerie, pa narodul captata iubarea ceva încă ze sluji. Și-a poșnit a lucra contrabandul. În zona nușcă listoarele fost a mai țene și 4 bote nego fără de zona. Samo stvarilo kaj će tabaku și soara preko štatu buta monopolu, sigder guštajta jednako. Kontrabandu n-a lucrat samo narodu din Șușnevice și okolice, nego și din Labinština, Žminština, Pazinština, de tot kraj. Tot celi ce a fost fără din zora, înnota cumpăravai din cea că a fost tot mai țenu. Mai interesate stvarele za kontraband fost a cafelu, sucaru și petrolea. Za cumpăra aceste stvarele în zona franca, morate avea pinezi, šake mai multe mesa vinde ce a avut de coasă, puloaštri, ovale, grăvu, truchinea, cumpiru. Ne cărgaita coargu prestoate cât a god putut purtoa. Și 4 și mai mult ure îmna priste codru, zaveri în Lovron, moștenička droga, ali tot per la Rica, și Pokle zaturna încă 4 ure. Contrabandierii se mărat bire veglio che nu-i coațu finanța ali carabinieri. Se le coațoia, lavaia le coarigu. S-a avut zalica roba, măraita plati multa, e s-a avut mai mult stoarure, măraita mare în pârjun. Pârjunul posta în pozin, iuva zeclidavaita contrabandierii. Contrabandul posta greu lucru și cu moare riști. Carabinierii și finanța fermivaita contrabandierii când fugia brovota hitaita din pucșa după el e nușcarli și ucisa. Posta și nușcarli loadri cu pucșile ali pištole koje štivuta stânzele pre koje trecavaita narodu cu contrabandul și ceavota le pristrașia și le vaia coarigu. Și mea pranona și prenono lucrata contrabandul. El vuta coasa galdirle și vindavaita ovale și pulaštri, ali când nu a avut dosti coasă, štivuta mare prin selište cumpăravai ovale și Pokle priste codru ne cărgaiți în navaita za vindel în zona franca și când vindaia ceavonta cumpăraia cafelu, sucoru și petrolea za previnde. Mai mult în contraband mnota ma prenona Maria și lavaia cu sire și filia Ljuba, Manona. Ceavota Manona n-a avut neanche 12 ani. Moaia le zicea, Emna Ljubița cu mire, avea și tu ceva ze sluji. Buta șoachițe făcute de tela în coarli pureaia cafelu presen și lagoaia sucotula ali susir, șa că nu se vede când le finanța vegetaia. O volta mi-a zis nona că a verit pre o blocada de finanță și că a murit mare ioa și moaia cu finanța în Medveje, colo a fost ca germa. Măraita pure prescond tot ce a avut de contraband. Ea pusă prescond o pinche de părea și stresita cafelul ce a avut în jep. Ali tot ce a scuns-o presire n-a vrut tratua. Finanța va întrebata se oare încă ceva. Ali ea a fost acuraină și zisa că nu are nici. Oato. Și încă zisa lo finanțierul cum nu le joa lubrișnea fata lua tot ce oare. Finanțierul zisa că oare și-o avurdine. Intanto, I-a trecut a bire și dus acasă de voto tot ce a avut scunso. Zisa că saka vota ce a mes priste codru nu ște se služia și după nu știu cât vremea că a sparavit cât a pines ce a fost dosti za cumpăra o voacă. Ema pranona, fosta cioară vridna și curoina, ea mai mult vote când purtaia contrabandu finia în prăjunul toazin. Eu a văzut ideea și po 7 zile. Când și-a spăravea, eu am ascultat tota pristrășită. Brižna manonița, cum te-a fost teșco? Ali ea zicea că comăt pocinia zoalic, colo că coasa toți mira mamăraită teșco lucro. În prăjun, toți fosta contenții că ne-a veria. Cum a știvut cose, ce vota mărea și în prăjun cârpi lanțunile și tot ce rabia. Ali dămpătia și mai bura hrana za muncoa și vă captoaia mai bire nego celi alții. Contrabandul s-a lucrat tot pe la miliarde și 3 leoan când a capitulat toalia. Ma prenona n-a finit cu purtoa ovala, priste codru. După dova gvera, purtoata ovala leonopatie, ali ne o atom nenda, nego cu cariera. Ovale compravajta slastičarne za lucra gelato. Vasteze nu je ato ni nona, ni pranona, ali štorijele de cea brama s inka vije și prinesitla în ecomuzej Vlaški puti, cu štorijele de nostru narod, și nostri bătări fosta vridni, čuda și grelo lucrata, fosta mizeria, ali toturo fosta contenți. Și hmăceraș pure ur scurt film.
Make sure you share the sound also when you share the file. Click the share computer sound.
Interesantna je priča o Andersu Bratišiću kojega su zvali Veli. On je isto nosio veću kave u jednom prolazu. Moral je naići je bilo usko, moral je naići na 2 financijera. I sad govori, on je to meni osobno pričao. Šta ću storit, nema kam. Ja sam ih zgrabi, zevi puške i hiti njih dole na kraju, a i njih sam hiti preko njega zida. On je baš rekao, hiti sa ih tja. I onda ša skritu vreću doma, a i mene vele brke, one austrijske, i tako obrilje brke i šaljeva na dragu na placu, na oštariju i sedel, da vidi ča se događa. A Talijani su se svi rastrčali da traže jednega čovjeka z velemi brki, da ga moraju kao uhapsiti, a on se sme među njima.
Jože pokala se mare, Jože zdrobice su nam, još tamo je to nešto šnjevi, se jeko dota porto, 5 vrste de ciment de 50 kg, ma narodul spravljaju, doan tašo și ure preună. I da vaštore, majko draga, mai toare krstiona da šopli kršni čovjek, što se ceja de monte po hrvatski, no. Și mecoce, și je, o vița spravit că urmere, da mare zarona na 4 ure, triște cudru, că merg un logron, uvale vinde, de uve, din puli, vitale ja uve, puli de șurom, puli să uve stori. Što da tu se ia foșa, sucor, ulje, farine, petrolio, tot era bine, că le-a tot mai țin. Oriș, na vrste sucor de cafe purtoia. Oșta șvirțul, niște cudru și Ionut ăsta șuș nu a lăsat, ma mezeia se, na liști. Și mi s-a de marețe, mețoace și Iože, niște cudru, cu moară, cu vrste, cu uvale zguru, ma Iože că trebuie 50, mețoace că avea mai. Iože că trebuie 50 uve. Și mi s-a și colea în Weigand, ăsta în moară după nici nu asculta știi multe se vede niște cudru. Mai mai apre cafe, limare, popirachia, ăsta și se grepita mețoace și ieși că Geana un căștivan colea de la o coasă, veliți, să la noi. Descoperi orachie de șan conuba. E conuba vă așa, de tot 3 scaline în stoluma și mețoace meșa în stoluma vrste scaline. Scalinele vă tolica poledite, vă ude și poledite, roda vă. Și Iože ca mes cum ala cuște ove, la îndată și a popluze, iar caduta, uvale teruta așa. Uvale ramosa țele, e ca junta cu vărbătul trupita de șcalin, trupit că să ai mu, se la ziua retrupit ma zoli ca ea, ali se je da uvalera naš sele. Cijela familija žice kao uvalera razbiti. Uvale meše prište kodu kada je vidiš i koji duce za mgua sa dupecuri.
Voilà, Vivi. Bootlegging 101.
I can stop. Whoa. Excuse me. Okay.
Mai zici ceva sau Gane Robert?
Gana Robert.
Hello to everyone. I'm honored to participate today to this workshop, and I would like to thank to Ionut for his invitation. I will give my presentation, better say my memories from the childhood in Zejanski language. So. Can you see my presentation?
Da.
Okay.
Se vede bine.
Când am înmânat în a patrele razred de srednje šola, între knjige de lektira ce am urajt proberi, aflacav și complet de Marcel Proust. Când am verit drede ja, ca și cela bur școlan, cela ce acața petițe, vlatam cea knjiga în măr și poșnitam oberi. După prve stranice, când am spomenit Coambra de Șugru și de Dulce Madeleine, care torna spomini, eu am văzut zaklis și m-am întrebat kako vo eu cea beri, kako cea mie era bea. Și odlučitam cu nervozul de falot că nu voi beri sta knjiga și am riskiruit că me va šumajštarica de hrvatski klima și că îmi va în nimenic zapisai tâmna ocjena, ur. 10 ani după cea, ca și n-a intrat, când am odomorața rano verit în Zejan, oživitam amel spomini de când am fost mic. Fostav nikdir în pode de vera, a doua parte de iulie, nu me poc više domisli. Ieșitam din curiera și otutitam frișcheța de domerață în codru. Prepeane de gârmure la cale încă s-ar țirut rosa. Mesam către acasă eu abivait nona și nono. Îmnândă cu ameale misli ce muresc zi opravi, la zi de ogmoaina aproape nasu mi s-am napunit cu toare dig de pocosita iarba. În cela zeit m-am ustavit și ca și cei din două ce se oaru rad și care se zăgălesc când e de icea și nu vrei să se lasa, că știu că mor că nu vor să vei nicat vedea, așa am și eu vrut neca cela troat durea lungo. Ce a fost a mea Dulce Madeleine. Când a fost mic, domereață în veara în Zejan poșnită când m-am sprăbărit în Coambra de nona și nono. În cea Coambra în polace am fost îns și ascultatam glasurile care s-au miniait cu vacile care le-au rucait în ștala, cu gălirile care au cocodait ali cu negru care fido care le-au latrat na scurto și care le-am avut rad. Provajte mogonisme smo jos în kuhinje înși, ali ab suseda već verit de în lik potekulaj și normalno n-am mai te avizait că va veri. Se a fost tot mirno, pomalu m-am sculat din pat și mesam jos. Jos la șcalinii mai dolini în camarin, la școaf, fost av sitiu cu laptele ce a fost pomuzito segutra rano și tot pocrito cu gaza neca mușnu coadu în ioe. Ce a fost laptele ce s-a lăsat acasă. Lato av nona već rano, când av sorele ieșit dus în seliște în coasă la Barișco. În cea coasă cui gospodarii a meschioat din seliște a fost locul de av camionul din Bistriț tot per la 90 ani de pasani leveit laptele de vargin. Duce lapte la Barișco din ceale coasă în care s-a încă țirut vaci, fost a prva prilică de a vzi cei de novo de la ieri, în seliște și departe. N-am fost dosti curioși de duce laptele cu nona, măcar o vota și vedea cum ce toți le dvea. Voie de rămărea în pat și sproberise cu malo mi-a fost mai tare. În cuchină n-a fost niciur. Premoarele ap șpurghet, toți a fost veara avzița cum a puțcheait focul. În boc de șpurghet în coada s-a teplit apa. Muraița v domereață scuhai merinda, lăhca, de ștaion. Măneștra cu bigule și fajo. Pak hiti în ea în lig de cobasița și tot ce am mâncat cu salată de redici cu cumpir. La coada, în cutul de șpurghet, fosta boola cu cafetul cu hait de țicorie, divca. Vlatam oabă olița și în ea ulit divca și laptele. Vârg de cafe în olița plaveaita v șcrelucu. Măraița încă samo na regie în lig de coaș și feta de cea așa bura păre care s-a cumpărat la butegărița Mira. Ca și zicem, în locul de lapte din Jeien, cu un alt camion din Bistriț verita ceale mari ștruțe de păre poslogite în mari splitite spărte. Hlebul a verit văcănistele țai. În butiga l-au așteptat Jejanchele, vreo Jejanaț și vreo vot acelea ce au ca și eu verit în seliște în veara din vreo cetate aproape ali departe, morcă și din America, ali din Australie. L-au așteptat necă butigărița doaie de la ad crai de șanc, ceea ce a verit cumpăra, Jejanchele s-a pogovoruit între sire. Butigărița a amnat din crai de salaș părloat. Cum au celii ce au verit în butigă vrut nu știe despre ele. Când Jenska ali omul n-a vrut vișeniș, atunci au butigărița preîncus de harta cu lapi și-u făcut răciunul. Și vreo vot au pre răciunul dodădit și dugu care cea ali ce l-a avut. După ce a înasat teca prețărteai dugu. Se la vrurvea și scapa novița că se nu știre din seliște în suora li merita. În bucătiga se reacea zai din dozneai și ne de la chioacule nego s-a văzut din stalaj. Că în ceale zile s-a în butiga aflat regali zămătait în celofan. Olițe de te ali cafe, glajurile, ruhele ali otirnăci. Mie în butiga a fost mai drag frigider desno de la ușă în care a așteptat sladole. Păr l-am șezut la merendă în cuchine la miza și făcut m-am că nu merg din cea că focul arde, întrebat m-am, iubai nona. Morca a intrat mes în vărt luarea diciu ali paricheai hrana de porci. Sigur n-am mes firu obrăciui că merinda nu e încă scuheaita. În cela țaitu avdu fiind zvuk de mlătățul care le bate pre flier. Nazrit m-am din ușe și ved nono cum zoace pre boc pre ioarbă într-ușe, pre modra flaida care a purtat când a fost șaferul de curieră și cum cleptea cosa. Nu l-am văzut ciuda vote că ce a lucrat. Că de când eu pametesc nu s-a văzut așa ciuda vote cosa rabeit ca și de mante. În țaitu ce eu pametesc, cosa vlasata se vlocle cosilițe, cu care au mai vișe cosita me poconele strițul Luciano. Tornome la miza, e ne de munt vire nonă în companie cu asev zărman, care se cheamă și pisea ca și e, Mihina Doricic. Celălalt Mihina e covaciu și e bivea în alt crai de seliște. El a învățat zanatul de la sev cioaie, Isto Mihina, care s-a făcut în coasa la noi, la Opcerit. Doi zărmani și edu sachele la încrai de miza și la glajici de rachie în lic se pominiuis. În cuchine se oab de dimul de tabac, de doi spaniuleti care se cliemă o patia și care îi drăgesc nasul, ali eu nu mergea de la miza. Ce la dihu încă și astăzi proberea drag spomin. Ne de munt în coasa vire și nona Anina cu radici un zdila vârg de coarle strei oșore. Vlatlav de la Galir. Ioa lasă zdila și meaje finit cu heima neștra. După aceea va ie na nostra gmaina la lac obrni firu, care l-avier de la podne pocosit Luciano. Verii vor ajuta și al ei cunioada teta Anina lui Filip și prietelița Dorinca lui Belin. După merinde și după ce s-a vânlit pocinit, morea să ia fir. Prevoză stream vechi tramele, doi ochviri de lemn care își popreco spoiți cu jița de traje firul cu vozul. Desna și liva trama spoite cu jlaidre, între care în voz puru vilele și durabilele. În amel spomine a fir s-a mes cu vozul care a vucit mic trator. Când s-a mes grabi, fost av ciuda de celii ce a venit ajuta. Cu nona, nono, al ei filii și nevestele, vruri de rod, ajutat-am și eu. Sachele au avut asev lucru. Jenskele au mai više pus fir în cup, la care preste av nono gonit tratorul, alți mușchi au cu vilele hitait firul în voz. După înțaid, ur de mușchi au mes pre voz și peștaita firul neca se pote tot de la gmaina poberit de ovota. Se a fost gmaina moara, s-au mes a fir încă ovota. Ujaita am grăbi firul, e celii mai betări m-au învățat cum se cea pravo lucra. Așa am trecut sachele cantunul, sachele gărm în gmaina, în pamete mi-a așa și rămas confinii. Păr la ancia nostru, preste gmaina lui Magata, lui Cleone, ili de roat. Vea stărpa în coruna. Deci în sus, păr la cela gărm, e după ei ravno, tot păr la țeasta ce merge cât rămune. Arătăvait mi-am nono când am fost în a noastră gmaina în ograda. Lucrul la firul în gmajna potut vă înlic ustavi sa vrur de la quale pozdravit cela ce a isto mesa fir, ili sa cu vozul plir de fir turnat acasă. Ujajta au lăsat pozdravit și celii care au mes vedea cum cumpirul al făjolului niva creaște. Pozdravit și întrebat. Eva uscat. Tot ce la țait sorele au svitit, e hladul s-a putut afla samo la o mare legămă de lisca, ali s-a vreo mai mic oblac nascuns sorele. Tot s-a fost clad, grăbit s-a pomalo. E când a fost nebo sivasto, tot s-a captat în sus, n-a lăsa, care împoberit tot, zapeleai firul acasă și spravi între godina. Rad am captat sinocoșele de la voz plir de fir când s-a avtratorul povocit către acasă. Vrit mi-au că sinocoșele spodăblius lu parcu, ce la engleschile. Vărtită în cap cum am murit fi când s-a cosit și gmane codea noastră. De când am eu fost mic, veți a fost vișet de ceale care nu s-au cosit. Când s-a lesa pus nazat și când s-a punteat cu două ărpi, ce-a fost semănă că e lucru în gmajna de acea zi gotov. Triba ei acasă și eu pravi zadnile lucru, spravi firul în pod. Cum am frătătorul verit în trușe tot a vacilor din ștala poșnit rucheai și așa l-a pozdravit. În ștala a fost samo două vaci și viței. Cea betâra vaca climata am sivca. Cea tirera n-a avut ima. Morcă că avea fost nu șcum târdoglava, pac a fost nona și nona pre ei adni. Ceale două vaci n-au ca și cea blaga care a živit între cornar leta na nostra ștala, împregnite cu iaramu, tras firul acasă, arat ali vlacit în codru. Mâine lucru și novele țaitu, dusam că a noastră sivca niciodată n-am nicad mes în polie paște după ce a fost pocosito. Nicad n-a bărstit frunza de la gârm și nicad n-a mes după paște bea frișco apa ce-a din fântăra tocit în dolinile lac i-a beiut blaga de la Sâncovți. Știvutam vetiredu cum a lucru irenche. În roace în ștala, la băci cu verze, fost zelene chiște de bira ce s-a climat lașco. E bira afară așteptat ceaia, strițul, zărman ali priateli care le-au cea zi ajutat la fir. Race boță de bira tot asputită, n-a ciudat stat premiza întrușe. Că ea s-a așteptat încă de când s-a fost în polie. Seatea a fost marea și boța s-a spraznit de o bota. Acum s-a mers la zadnile lucru cea zi, spravi firul în pod. Sorele a drept-o svitit în ușa de pod, eu s-a hitait firul cu vilele din voz. Nu știrea pomisli că e mai tâmnă acel veace din vozul dvizea firul către ușa de pod. Cred că nuciur nu ra se miniai cu cela care le-a subcoat crov de ștala în șcuro, toți le-au crujit cu prahul de uscoate roși și mârve de fir, vrovotă și sprignit, murait peștai firul îmnândă ochi și colea. Muraita și priscăcai griedele de crov, e tot nou fir av din ușa verit către ei. Când s-a auzit că vilele grebesc spre dâștile de voz ali prevoale, ce-a fost semănul că e vozul de șoar și nu vechi firul de spravi. Întrușa cu seara verit și mir. Samova puliu ratoviță târlit și scupliut prevale mărvele. E muștav și rente foste ștufne. Afoara premiza aflata s-a rupoi boțele de bira ali de vir. Acum s-a beiut pomalo. Ujivuța că lucru a fost gotov și triba a fost scupi forțe de lucra măre. E măre va strițu ei pocosig maina la beseareca. Seara a fost roșo de la târst și și măre va fi fina zi. Așa și zis pre televizie. E că așa fi arătată și publicova practica. Calendarul care s-a ciuda ani rabit în a noastră familie de vedea cum vreme va fi. Ali când e lura pa că am putut ugoni când se va noastră sivca oteli. Teacole de seară întrușe, dusav și cușiciurile de coarli s-a putut sluji istoria de coșne în cela țait când a merg nono Mihin a fost falot. În cela țait, coșnița a cosit după Petrova și cosița 2 meseci de zile. De mandaleni în fește de beseare ca în mune nu s-a mers lucra în polie. În coșni s-a mers de măreața rano, vișe de ei. Vrovota s-a climat și hlapții în jurnadu. Coșni s-a prechinit cu fruști, cu cafe și păre. Atunci au jenska la doua vota dus merenda, e după ea în gamela berze și palenta și în lig de cobasiță ali de uscato, cea tot de merinde. Mati nek s-a turnat în seliște, jenska la cu sârpul poșnit iarba, cu de ărpi și cu de crugure necă nu se cosea strica. Cum îți nu școare sinocoș iacona în sus, ca și la fântăra. Atunci s-a firul legat prechita și vucit în jos pe la coale și după aceea cu vozul cu vacea ale boii tras acasă. Morai să spravi dosti fir în par de boi și 2-3 vaci și de nu știu cât oi. Totul se blaga per la prvile nea păscut afara prin pole. Se în pod n-a fost dosti loc de spravi fir, întruși ale aproape de ștoala ali dvorul lucrața copile. Când s-a vtiuc oglasit, verita țaitul de ei dormi. În somnul mi s-a mișat ceea ce am zi văzut și lucrat, cu ceea ce nu știind fost coșne codejăienu. Acum e ștoala de șarta, în camera le none și lui nono nici urveit nu dorme. Eu tot mai više mislesru poi vla în măr combre, samo stavota voi proberi knjiga per la kraj. Verita a na mea življenja cajtu de čava face. Hvala vam.
Thank you very, very, very much. And I just want to draw everyone's attention how lucky we are just to hear native speakers of Zejanski, Vlashki, Istro Romanian speaking here for us. So I think we are really, really, really privileged. And I would like to thank again both Viviana and Robert for this most delightful presentation. I'm very, very happy for this. And in case I haven't thanked before, I would like to thank them again, Robert, Viviana, and Zviesdana for their help last summer when we were there, and they gave us access to their culture, language, environment, friends, families. Yeah, so thank you again. We're running behind, but I think that's somehow okay this time. So maybe we have time to take 1-2 short questions or comments. No fear, burvir.
A short one. Looks like most of the words related to Romanian are in the area of agriculture, food, like the old customs, like how to say, life related, all times. This is what I could understand mostly from your last, Robert, your presentation. Very, very nice presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You are right. The most of the lexic is related to the agriculture and the everyday life. So even you can see that some of the words are loaned even from the let's say 19th or 20th century are coming from, in case of Zejanski, are coming from German, or like Šumajštarica, Šula, but also it could be also from Slovene, and Glaj. So all those that show that people from Geana had the contact mostly with these parts of the then Austro-Hungarian Empire and or Austrian Kingdom before monarchy before that. So it shows their relations with those parts of the then European countries.
Thank you. One more short question.
Just asking Robert, can you share the text that you have read, that you have presented? Eventually, if you have a translation in Daco-Romanian or English, that would be fantastic.
I prepare it using the using the orthography we used in the project, the preservation of the Vlashki and Zejanski language. So it is done with Croatian, adapted Croatian orthography with special letters of Romanian. So I can just, if you would like to see how it looks like for a second from the word I just read it.
Okay.
Maybe yes, but in case that there will be some possibility to publish it later, I will be glad to do so. So
may I say something? We have this recording, and Ileana Costea, usually she's editing the recording, and maybe you should send to her and she could insert the word, the document, the written document. And if it's okay with you. That's a suggestion.
Okay, we will, yes, we will see, just please for a moment. So here I will just.
For everybody, I've just put in the chat the Vlashki Zejanski website, and you can see there the manner Robert is talking about. So writing Istro Romanian in a Croatian manner. I mean, using actually a combined Romanian and so on. Okay.
So here you can see a part of the section of this speech. Okay. If I may, I would like just to excuse myself because I had to run to another seminar now. So it was my pleasure once again to be here. And then next hopes to see you somewhere in this virtual world, or if not, then in Croatia, in Geana, or in surroundings.
Thank you very much, Robert. Indeed, he did tell me he had a different commitment from 5 o'clock local time, but I still managed to steal him for like another half an hour or so. Thank you very much, both Viviana and Robert. And now, well, I'm not the best moderator, as you can see, but I hope you'll forgive me. So let's move next to Oana Bărbulescu and Martin Maiden. They will talk about Istrox, the challenges of dialect fieldwork by proxy. So Oana or Martin or both, you have the floor.
Martin. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just starting up here. Can you see the screen? Can see it now. First of all, thank you to the organizers of this event. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here and to see so many friends as well. The topic that Oana and I are going to be talking about is to do with the Oxford Istrox project and some of the challenges we've faced in trying to do dialect field work by proxy. Oana, can you show the next slide, please?
Yes.
Just a word or two about the Istrox project. The full title is the Istro Romanian Language and the Oxford University Huron Donation. It's financed by Oxford University, and it lasted 2 years, just over 2 years. And primarily it involved recovering and making publicly available the hitherto unpublished sound recordings and other materials gathered over 50 years ago by the English linguist Tony Huron. All this material was very generously donated to the university by Tony Huron's widow, Vera, who is still very much with us. And these recordings were made between 1966 and 1967, both in Geana and in the villages around Shushnievica. Next slide, please. We adopted a global approach to the work we were doing, to the development of Vlashki and Zejanski, looking at it from its development from 1966 to the present day. And the project also developed an online element using the Zooniverse platform to help involve the Istro Romanian community itself in preserving, translating, and understanding the recorded material that we had. And at the same time, our project was concerned with synchronic documentation of the language in its present state, made all the more urgent by the fact that the number of active fluent speakers is, and long has been, in dramatic freefall. Next slide, please. This is an example of the kind of thing that the participants online in our project could find online. What would happen is they went to our website and they could hear snippets from Huron's recordings where we either didn't understand or we weren't sure that we understood, or sometimes we were being a bit faux naif and pretending we didn't understand because we wanted absolute confirmation that we had understood what we were seeing. So we had a lot of input from members, speakers of the language. Next slide, please. In what we were doing, Hurren's recordings had pride of place as we opened them up to the public. Our work on them also stimulated us to test how far some of the tendencies identified by Hurren in noun and verb morphology in particular have extended and developed down to the present day. Next slide, please. Our efforts to integrate Hurren's recordings into the study of the development of Vlashki and Zejanski raised numerous methodological problems. Hurren's interviews were based on questionnaires, which in many cases have not survived, so that all we have of them is the participants' responses, but we don't actually have the original questions that were asked. So sometimes we had to sort of reconstruct what was asked or what might have been asked. Moreover, neither the participants' details nor Hurren's field notes have always been preserved. Working from the recorded responses we have reconstructed, as far as possible, the details of those questionnaires and of the speakers interviewed. And our attempts to address these problems helped us to devise our planned fieldwork surveys of 2019 and 2020. Next slide, please. One problem involved the process of data collection, and specifically the selection of participants or subjects for a dialectological survey. Hurren carried out 2 fieldwork trips in 1966 and 1967, and he made over 30 hours of recording, most of them responses to questionnaires, but among that there's about 5 hours worth of recordings containing stories, tales, and personal narrations. And that was particularly valuable material, obviously. Hurren's surviving field notes indicate that he interviewed 40 speakers, but we spotted slight discrepancies between his field notes and his recordings. And in fact, we have not yet been able to find the recordings of 4 informants out of those 40. Next slide, please. In his choice of speakers, Hurren took account of multiple sociolinguistic variables. Age, in 1966 to 67, the participants were aged between 8 and 70. Sex, this was reasonably well balanced, 17 women and 23 men, and geographical location and distribution. And he had a reasonable balance between Shushnievice and surrounding villages in the south and Geana in the north. And in the next slide, we see a graphic representation of that. But what is particularly noticeable about that representation is that a particularly active, economically and socially active age group, the 19 to 30 age group, is rather poorly represented. Next slide, please. And he makes no comment on this situation himself, so we don't quite know what happened there. A further challenge of our work on Hurren's archive was to recover as far as possible the participants' details. We found their nicknames, obviously a very important factor in local society. We found notes on their ages, but we don't know their educational backgrounds, and we could only surmise what other languages they spoke besides Croatian. We did not know either the family relationships between the informants that Hurren interviewed. Also, although some information about this was discovered when we visited Croatia in Istria in 2019. Next slide, please. In planning our fieldwork, we allowed for a number of sociolinguistic variables. In addition to the traditional ones that Hurren used, age, sex, and region, we consider the level of schooling and education, other languages known, and speakers' own assessment of their linguistic competence. Further criteria were whether they'd been in the same locality over the previous 10 years, whether they had spent 6 months of their lives or more outside their birthplace, and how often they themselves estimated that they spoke Istro Romanian. And we elicited this type of information by using open-ended questions rather than closed questions. And also when they learned Croatian, both the standard language and the local dialect. Next slide, please. For our pilot test, we selected 8 participants, 4 from the north, 4 from the south, 5 men, 3 women, an age range of 51 to 70 with just 1 over 71. And they had various educational levels, and 6 of them we established knew Italian. And our initial intention was to interview this, and this was the thing we particularly wanted to do, was to interview the speakers who at the time of Haran's interview were in their teens, in order to make a direct comparison of Haran's results for those speakers with our own, and indeed to let those informants comment on the recordings that they'd made 50 years later. So the primary purpose of the first fieldwork trip that I and our colleague Adina Brădeanu made in 2019 was to obtain the consent of the participants or their descendants to make public the recordings of 1966, 1967, and to establish contact with the individuals who still survive. Next slide, please. We discovered that only 9 of the original participants were still alive. None of them were resident in their original community. And some of them were no longer using Istro Romanian. There's a case of what's known as first language attrition. Consequently, we found on that first visit, we really had to limit ourselves to establishing contact with the remaining speakers, but more extensive work would have proved very difficult given the time available. We realized that it would be important in the future to test the extent and nature of first language attrition and continue the work of asking those who had participated in Haran's research to comment on the language they used over 50 years ago and that they still hear in the recordings. Next slide, please. Haran's archive makes no mention of his methodology. We don't know how Haran made the acquaintance of his informants, how he won their trust, how he explained the aims of his inquiry, or how he went about eliciting a particular form. There are no significant interventions from Haran himself in the recordings, and the data represented as direct reports, as if the interviewer himself were invisible. So we needed to develop our own working methodology for our inquiry. And that led us to some problems. And because we're dealing with problems now, I'm going to hand over to Wana, who is far better at solving them.
Yeah. So yes, in the finest traditions of Mission Impossible, I will try not to ruin our presentation. So in my part, I will focus on 4 issues: the working methodology, the observer's paradox, the complex relations of power between researchers and informants or participants, and then the questionnaire design. So the first problem was establishing appropriate intermediate contacts. We enlisted the help of Robert and Viviana, of course, as contacts. Our heartfelt thanks to them once again for their generous support. Of course, there is an extensive literature on the techniques of making contact with informants. The theoretical literature cannot prepare you for everything. For example, in 2019, 2 of Haran's informants were rather reluctant to let us use their name or even use the recordings or other data concerning them. Approaching a community can only be done, of course, with a full understanding and appreciation of the legitimacy of individuals' practical reservations and concern. In our 2 fieldwork visit in 2019 and 2020, we were very careful to explain to our contact people what our project was about and to establish an honest and open relationship with them, making it clear that there was no underlying political agenda of any kind. The observer's paradox. So, and this leads directly to my next point. The phenomenon is well known in the literature, and I will not insist on the literature stuff. And it is basically a method of participants, speakers tending to adapt their linguistic usage to the expectations or preferences of researchers. Haran was surely well aware of this paradox, but neither his notes nor his recordings tell us what strategies he may have used to circumvent it. Strange as it may seem, the pandemic brought an unexpected partial solution to this paradox. Because we were unable to get to Istria ourselves, we resorted to fieldwork by proxy. And we were helped to do this by our colleague Anna Werkman-Horvat, which is assistant professor works as an assistant professor in the Department of English at the Faculty of the Humanities and Social Sciences in Osijek, precisely because Anna did not know anything about Istro Romanian, and her research interests lay in quite different areas of linguistics. She could have no preferences or prejudices regarding informants' responses. So the problem that did arise instead was that of code switching by informants when confronted with a native Croatian-speaking researcher. A new working methodology was needed, which Anna followed fairly strictly. She began by presenting the project and the topics about which she was going to ask the informants and saying how long the questionnaire would last. In addition, at the beginning of each interview, we attempted to speak briefly and informally in Istro Romanian via Zoom to each of the informants. We made many mistakes, and many here is in euphemism. Of course, that we stress each time that we wanted to learn the language and to learn about the language. And that was why we were gathering the material. We try not to overlook the role of the researcher interviewer in co-constructing interview data. We don't have a magic solution, but we gave the most serious consideration to the ways in which the interviewer's participation significantly affects what the respondents end up saying and how they say it. There is a rich literature too on how to develop interview guides or protocols, what types of questions to ask and when, interview ethics, computer mediating communication interview, and so on and so forth. But then again, there is a many leap between theory and practice, and we have to work out how to calibrate complex relations of power between researcher and informants and ensure that participants' voice be heard loud and clear. Until we had to set up the proxy survey, we didn't really have an answer to an apparently trivial question. Who determines when to terminate a line of questioning? Our experience of working on the Haran archive was of little help with this. In this case, too, we agreed with Anna that it would be appropriate to share power, so that she would subtly control how the discourse unfolded in the context of its production, and would offer participants control over its recontextualization, allowing them to show how it draws on other discourses and contexts, when and by whom it will be used and to whom it will be of use. Here too, our basic premise was that the researcher or the interviewer plays a role, but not a central one, in creating the conditions for the participant's voice to be heard by establishing trust, asking questions, but letting the participant decide whether the questions are the right ones. Participants were free to interrupt, correct a form, explain to us why one form was preferable to another, to make any commentaries about the language or to use or the use of individual words. In many cases, the questionnaires used by Haran have not survived, but the recordings have given us an idea of what the questionnaires were like. Haran used broad questionnaires with hundreds of questions across all areas of grammar. The recordings also reveal moments when participants seem to lose interest with respect to one linguistic problem or another. This prompted us to consider a different approach. Our questionnaires are much reduced in comparison with Haren's. They are modular and combine interview, the questionnaire itself, semi-structured elicitations, and so forth, and so on. What are we testing? A more restricted questionnaire inevitably requires more focused and rigorous criteria for selection. For example, in nominal inflection, we tested the range and use of the plural ending ure. To this end, we selected nouns of various origin, mono and polysyllabic, some taken from Haren's questionnaires, others tested by Kovacev's, but drawing on all the sources, Glavina, like Amoraru, Candamina, and so on and so forth. We tested the behavior of these nouns in simple and complex quantifier structures. We tested pluralization strategies according to different senses of polysemous nouns. We used both direct questions and multiple choice questions, with attested and unattested forms, sentence completion tasks, contrasts between singular and plural noun phrases, and so on. For example, for cuptor, we tested the form doi cuptor. You have on the slide all the forms, but we also obtained the form doi cuptor in South, which is not attested in any other source. For par, we tested doi par, doi parure, and so on and so forth, but we also obtained the form pari in the South, which is again not attested in any other source. Recording bilingual speakers involves additional considerations. Firstly, learners' own language use and their code switching patterns will be affected by knowing that they are interacting with monolingual or bilingual researchers. Secondly, the presence of researchers might make participants self-conscious and lead to more self-monitoring and less code switching. To control code switching, when the interview was in Croatian and the questionnaire had been translated into Croatian, of course, Anna agreed to read out certain forms in Istro Romanian in order to see whether they were still recognized by participants. Here too, there is more work to do. In that, we'll have to construct complex tests to establish the relationship between word recognition and word identification. Oh. It was no easy matter to construct the questionnaire. Martin and I prepared the questionnaires for translation into Croatian. We also tested TThes. But of course, the expression of definiteness in Croatian is a complex matter and different from Romance languages. We were interested in the Istro Romanian definite article, but Croatian has no definite article, although it has some limited strategies for expressing definiteness. Anna sometimes thought to elicit Istro Romanian forms by suggesting nouns in Istro Romanian rather than in Croatian. The reactions are sometimes surprising, suggesting lexicalization of the Istro Romanian definite article, so that in the singular, the form with the article seems to be the citation form of the noun. This is a phenomenon that will repay close further study. This mainly happened when speakers were asked, do you use the word loop, foc, fund, noi? But they initially appeared puzzled and eventually corrected this to the forms with the definite article, suggesting that in some way the article was becoming reanalyzed or lexicalized as an inherent part of the noun. Lupu, focu, fundu, noiu. We also encountered cases of apparent lexicalization of the article where speakers select definite forms of the plural in phrases with numerical quantifiers. 3 biciurile, 10 cucurile. And what conclusion can we draw from this? The Haran collection has offered the opportunity to find solutions to otherwise unexpected problems. We developed our own dialect survey on the basis that speakers are not merely producers of data, but must in particular be involved in fine-tuning the questionnaires in such a way that they are not exclusively of use to researchers. And this may prompt a discussion about the transformation of dialect surveys from mere research instruments to instruments of social practice. And finally, we are just a handful of researchers working with a handful of speakers of Istro Romanian, and it is in everybody's interest that we should create a community in which our results, our questions, and our proposed solution for methodological questions of documentation and preservation of the language can get the fair hearing they deserve. Thank you so much. Voila.
Thank you very much, Martin and Oana, for this very, very nice presentation. The floor is now open for questions.
Found one word which is similar, swimming, so pływać, P-L-Y, something like this. And the designing questionnaire, since I'm a statistician, I understand how important the questionnaires are. And if they are too long, then people will be sort of annoyed and bored. So get to the point, gather the information, whatever you need. So I would like to say you are on the right path, designing the proper questionnaires.
Can I just intervene there? You're absolutely right, and you say get to the point, and that's quite right. But sometimes getting to the point too quickly can be counterproductive. If you're a sort of really boring linguist like me, interested in fine details of morphology, and I want to know exactly what the subjunctive of that verb is, you can really leave people feeling bewildered. They don't understand what's going on if you keep saying, you know, how do you say he wants to come or something like that? And you have to find more elaborate, gentler ways of approaching people and eliciting the data without hammering away. And in a sense, one of my criticisms of Haran, with the wisdom of 50 years of hindsight, would be that some of his questionnaires were just endless questions about how do you form the plural of this? What's the past tense of that? And the poor old speakers who have lives and more interesting things to do get very bored very quickly. So you have to find a balance.
That's what I meant, yeah. But are there any studies about the impact of Austro-Hungarian Empire on all these languages? Because I was also, you know, in this area. Galicia was the north part of Austro-Hungarian Empire.
I think I would leave Oana to answer that question.
No, as far as we know, they are not. Yes, they're not such.
This might be interesting because there are so many German words in Polish language and also in this Istro Romanian, right? The one that Robert presented. Is it a dialect or is it still a separate language? What's the difference? Sorry.
If I may say so,
you got to
that
be.
Is a question you should never ask a linguist.
I know.
I know.
By accident, I was invited by Ileana. So it's a language.
Yeah, it all depends what you mean by a language. What you mean by a dialect. I will say no more than that. And it's actually questions of that kind can be extraordinarily politically sensitive, and people can get, in my view, unnecessarily agitated about them. So it's a kind of question I never answer.
So these are just the regions. In Poland, we have Silesia, Silesian language, and Highlanders. You know, so maybe that's the thing. So there are different regions. They use different languages.
Yeah.
Sort of versions.
We linguists have very often had this trick of not talking about languages or dialects, but talking about speech varieties in order just to get around the whole problem of the different status of languages and dialects and so forth. And
I will tell my friend, she's teaching linguistics at the University of Southern California. She went to Palm Springs today, so she said she cannot use the equipment, I mean computer over there, because that's her holiday. So I will tell her. Okay.
I think it was interesting when I heard the speech, not to use language or dialect.
Yeah.
When I heard the speech, I understood very many words, Romanian words. So there are very many Romanian words, and it is interesting that geographically this population is separated from Romania. Like it's kind of normal that in Romanian we have Greek words and Turkish words, but the Greeks and the Turkish were there, while these people are far away from Romania. And yet when you listen to them, you know, I as a Romanian, knowing Romanian, listening to somebody reading in Istro Romanian, I understand sometimes the idea of the sentence and very many times the words.
But there is a canton in Portugal and in Switzerland where they actually speak more close Romanian than this Istro Romanian. I mean,
yeah,
it's more close to Romanian than this, and they are far away. That means the geographical area maybe.
It's similar like Hungarian and Finland, right? Hungarian is so separated in terms of Central Europe, totally different language, and it's very close to Finland language. Finns.
Maybe it's a thing about lateral areas of different language families and so on that happen to overlap some of the features, but I'm sure that someone from Switzerland and someone from Portugal need to put a lot of effort into really mutually understanding each other.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My questions are
so 1 hour marking wants to answer like
Romania, and how do the Istro Romanians feel in Croatia about Romania?
The best people to answer the question about how Istro Romanians feel about Romania is to ask Istro Romanians. I would not dare to give an opinion on that subject. It's what they think. And I'm afraid your other question about how many Istro Romanians are there in Romania, I don't know.
We don't know.
Very few. Because there are very few native speakers left. If there are any in Romania, I think, I don't know whether Ionut or Wana knows, but I don't think there are any.
There was one in Ploiești.
Yes.
Never.
The same person, yes.
But it happens to be there. I mean,
I don't know.
It's not that you've discovered a speech colony on a Romanian island in Ploiești.
Definitely not. No.
Professor Caragiu may know, because I understood he is very educated.
I think you're comparing a bit with the way Romanian and Megleno-Romanian, let's say, works in comparison with Daco-Romanian. So Istro Romanian is really remote. So it's not like there was no population exchange like it happened, you know, with Megleno-Romanians, like in the Cerna, Tulcea, you know, there's like
there are a lot of Aromanians in Romania.
Yeah, and not to mention, you know, like Romanians coming from a lot of
here,
so it's not quite the same thing. So in short, none, and if there are some, they're exceptional.
That person existed.
Yes, employees.
So, but the answer is really no one.
Yes, thank you. I think it sort of comes on the heels of this other discussion in terms of the relationship or lack of relationship culturally and linguistically with the Romanian spoken in Romania. We've obviously heard a lot about the contact with Croatian. And of course, there's an assumption that there's a relationship with Daco-Romanian, but as many people know, you know, that relationship is historical and, as just discussed, has nothing to do with actual contact. My curiosity has always been, however, about any potential contact influence from the Italic languages of or that have presence in Istria, obviously Italian, Venetian, Istrian, historically Dalmatian, you know, because now we're talking about languages that are not immediately adjacent, but are in close proximity. And certainly in the case of the Italian language over the last 150 years, especially with modern media, you know, I guess my interest is to know really from a Romance perspective, and where Italian, for the most part, has not had much official status, right? Certainly not as a roof language, not as a language that sort of reigns over the speakers of Istro Romanian, but for a brief period, I suppose, between the wars. So I'm curious what people have to say about those influences.
Well, as far as Italian is concerned, I think there are two kinds of answers. One is that obviously for a period during the war, Italian was an official language taught in schools, and there is some clear influence from Standard Italian. Don't ask me to give examples because I can't off the top of my head, but I know that they exist. A second type of influence, which is probably much older, is the influence of Venetian, or any rate, dialects closely related to Venetian. And I found actually in the villages around Shushnievica, when I was there, I met some elderly people who said that they would speak to me in Italian. And they weren't really speaking Italian, they were really speaking a kind of Venetian dialect. So it's very clear that there's a deep-seated influence there, which also percolates in some ways into Istro-Romanian. You asked about Dalmatian, obviously spoken on the island of Caragiu, and the answer is on modern Istro-Romanian, I can't see anything, any influence from Dalmatian, whatever. In fact, I don't know of any influence at all of Dalmatian on Istro-Romanian. On the other hand, it must be said that the earliest attestations of Istro-Romanian actually come from the same island as the island that Ionut was spoken on. So who knows? There may have been a time when there was some sort of contact influence between them. But as far as I know, other people here may know better. As far as I know, no influence from that. Well, it's very interesting that in that relatively small area of the world, you have those two languages, one now dead, alas, and the other one very reduced.
Zviesdana, would you like to add anything?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so in terms of influence of Italian, I agree with everything that Martin has said. And but I just wanted to add that the local dialect of Croatian has been heavily influenced by Istro-Venetian over many centuries. So this is a place in Croatia which has always been a political, cultural, and linguistic borderland, and for centuries, really. So the influence of Istro-Venetian specifically on local Chakavian Croatian is enormous. So in terms of the lexicon, it's as big as the influence of Chakavian Croatian on Istro-Romanian is. So like, you know, half of the words have Italian origin in local Chakavian Croatian. And I'm, of course, approximating here, but a large proportion. So I would say that many of the words in Istro-Romanian that we say are Italian etymologically have actually made it into Istro-Romanian through the influence of Chakavian. I wonder, you know, how many of them would have made it there directly. You know, I think at some point I noticed some examples of that, you know, Italian words in Istro-Romanian that I don't know that exist in the local dialect, but unfortunately I can't remember them now. So there may be some, but I would say the majority of them entered the language through the influence of Chakavian Persian. Because that was the dominant contact. Yes, before World War II, lots of people were in direct contact. You know, there was direct contact with Italian because there were speakers of Italian. My grandmother was a speaker of Italian, of Istro-Venetian. So for instance, and so was my mother. Yeah, nowadays, since the World War II, that influence of Italian would have diminished dramatically. I don't know if there is time for a question for Martin and Wana.
I mean, why not? Sure.
Since we went overboard anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Really interesting. It was really interesting to see how you approach this. Very instructive to informative. So I was wondering, it's a terribly difficult task, of course, to do boring linguistic work and elicitation and still kind of include the speakers. So how exactly do you do that? And make them interested and make them kind of, you know, share the power stuff that you talked about.
That is, I don't know, Wana, do you have a view on it? It is difficult. It is frankly very difficult, and it takes a lot of time because you have to kind of embed the thing you really want to know as a boring linguist in a sort of broader discussion, which might seem more interesting to the informant. We, to some extent, we did manage to do this in the work we got Anna to do, didn't we? But yeah, frankly, it's not easy, and it's not easy because it takes so much time.
Yes, and then they had the freedom to talk about it, to talk about the questions, to talk about the forms, to say, oh, I don't use this form anymore, but my mother did, and so on and so forth. And they talked a lot in Croatian, unfortunately, but they did.
Yeah. Next time, try
I think that freedom. Yeah. What is it bad?
No, I said next time try the negruvir. Burville.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I know we
yeah.
did. And
I know what you mean, yeah. But they had this freedom, so yeah. They interrupted Anna and they said no.
It was very interesting. The fact that they felt sort of free to interrupt and comment produced a lot of various things we didn't really expect. And you know, you get them to, you know, you ask, what do you make of a form like this? And say, oh, no one would ever say that, or no, that's wrong, or you mean something else. But just letting them do that was very revealing.
Okay, I hope that answers Zvezdana's question. Now we're moving on. Okay, with everyone's permission, I will share my screen now for the final presentation in this workshop. So I promised at the beginning of this mini symposium or workshop that this is part of a larger project that I would talk about, and it's called Istro Romanian, Istro Romanians, Legacy and Heritage. So we have these 4 names because we did like a field work this summer, end of summer, beginning of autumn, fall in Istria. And I think it was very, very successful. I'm very happy for that. And again, I want to thank Zvezdana, Viviana, and Robert for helping us with a lot of data. Now, our project has some main objectives, and it's like to get like a new collection of text and data, and we're thinking of making them public as well. Then we try to update a bit the vocabulary of Istro Romanian. Of course, there are some sort of glossaries, dictionaries, and so on. I would just mention, for instance, Petronaescu's dictionary. Then we'll try to have a descriptive account of word order. So for now, I think Istro Romanian looks like, I believe, Latin look to a lot of people. So it seems like you can do anything, but then we'll try to see if you can really put like anything, whatever, and then still get a meaning out of it. And of course, we want to develop some linguistic questionnaires for a series of phenomena. We didn't do this when we went there this this summer, because we just wanted to get like a real touch, let's say, with the few Istro Romanians that are left. Now, among other things, we want to write a book. Probably it will be called like a tentative title, Istro Romanians, Legacy and Heritage, the same as the title of our project. We want to compare a bit the information we found in Istria to the information, let's say, we find at heritage speakers, but the very few I talked to don't really show like a great difference, let's say, from the way they spoke back home, especially since they don't actually use it. So that I know of, there are no strong communities of, let's say, second or third generation speakers of Istro Romanians. Then we'll talk about the main categories relating to verbs and nouns. And then, as I said, about the vocabulary. Now, in today's talk, we'll do like 2 case studies. So we'll talk about the allophones of A and E in Istro Romanian. And this will answer also, I'm sorry, Professor Caragiu is no longer here. We can only see his chair, but Larissa will talk a bit about that E and why it's not quite A, you know, like in a standard Daco-Romanian. Now I'll share my presentation and I'll give the floor to Larissa Nicolae. She's a PhD student, and I'm happy Professor Stan, her coordinator, is also with us today. So Larissa, I'll stop sharing and then the floor is yours, and I'll get back to my presentation in probably 10 minutes or less.
Okay, thank you very much, Ionut. Hello, everybody. I'm really happy to see you. Just a second to share my screen. Great. So, hello, I'm Larissa. I'm a PhD student. I'm studying phonetics and phonology. And my today's presentation is about allophones of the A and E vowels in Istro Romanian. It's an acoustic analysis. Today's talk is organized as follows. I'm going to talk about the objective, the vocalic system of Istro Romanian. I will show you the acoustic analysis, and I will try to draw some conclusions at the end of this presentation. This presentation represents an acoustic analysis, as I told you before, of the phonological variants that the vowels A and E have in Istro Romanian in the 2 varieties, Northern and Southern, built on an oral corpus. I used Harta Sonoră, Limba de Sakazi, and also the website Vlashki-Zejanski.com, where I saw and I heard some beautiful stories. And thank you very much for doing this, Viviana, and all your team. Istro Romanian has a vocalic system consisting of 7 phonemes. Istro Romanian has front vowels, back vowels, and also mid vowel. There is another interpretation of the vocalic system that indicates that Istro Romanian would have 8 vocalic phonemes through the existence of a stressed A, which is preserved in the unadapted borrowings from Italian and Croatian. There is a solution reached by Avram in 1977, who states that in Istro Romanian there is a vocalic system in which the 2 vowels A and A are variants of the same phoneme, as well as a system characterized by an opposition. As for the E vowel, Kovaček states that it is a front vowel, while the other variant is the most open vowel in the front series. In the Northern variety, it can only appear in stressed syllables, while in the South, it can also appear in unstressed but final syllables. Kovaček was wondering if these variants are of the same phoneme or not, and he brought some arguments for his hypothesis that they are 2 distinct phonemes. I wrote some on the slide. E is followed by A or E in the new loan words. We also have minimal pairs in Istro Romanian, and the context in which the more open vowel appears is not conditioned. So he thinks that E and its variant are two distinct phonemes. Regarding to case marking the genitive and the dative, in the southern variant, feminine nouns and adjectives can optionally have E as desinents for marking the genitive and the dative, the singular forms. And I wrote some examples. My Vlashki or Zejanski is not good, but you have them there. I will talk about the acoustic analysis because this is the most important part. I will try to talk firstly about A and then about E. In this slide, you have a table with some words. This acoustic analysis was made in Pratt. This is a program. And I look at the formants of the vowels, the first two formants. The first formant shows if the vowel is open or if it's closed. If the frequency is high, then the vowel is open. If the frequency is low, then the vowel is closed. And the second formant shows that if a vowel is front or back. If we have a high value, then it is a front value. And if we have a low value, then it is a back vowel. So looking at the table, I can say that the low values for the first formant show that A behaves like an open mid vowel, whereas the low values for the second formant indicate that this variant is more like a back vowel and not like a mid one. You can see the values in the table. It also, just a second, please. I also put some examples where there is A in the same word as wa, and the differences between the same phoneme in the same word show that the stressed vowel seems to be more rounded than the unstressed variant. The values for the second formant illustrate that the unstressed vowel is a mid one, whereas the stressed vowel is a back one. And now, just a second, it doesn't work. I don't know. Wait a second. Okay, yeah. The acoustic analysis of both varieties shows that in the northern area or variety, there is a better illustration of rounded A. The values below are for the word Maya, which means mother, and we can see that we have low values in the northern variety. So this is it. This is a better illustration of a rounded A than in the south. I don't know why it's not working. Oh, yeah. And now moving on to the next vowel, E, I have two tables for this one. The first one shows the words that were recorded in the north area, and the next one will be for the south variant. The values here in this table, in the third table, illustrate that this vowel is more open than E, which confirm Kovacek's hypothesis. E is the most open vowel in the front series. We can see that the values for the first formant and for the second formant are very high, so this can be related to this hypothesis. While in the south, if we look at the southern variant, we can see that there are higher values. For example, in this word that I have in the table, the first formant has a value of 193 hertz, which is very, very high. So we can say that this vowel is more open than E, which we have in Daco-Romanian too. The difference between the two varieties is that in south, this allophone is more open than in north. It's not a big difference, but it is there, so we should follow it. And I wanted to show you something. I found a recording when this word "lanei" was told by a woman for 5 times. And if we look at the values, we can see that there are differences. For example, for the third one, we can see that the values are very low. The value for the first formant is very low, and this can state that here this variant A is more like an E and not like an A, as we can hear. Maybe the reason that it's like this can be that it's almost at the end of the sentence. I'm not sure about this. I should look on other examples to see if it is the place in the sentence or not. Okay, a second. Okay, and I will try to draw some conclusions. I'm going to talk about the things, values, and the differences between North and South. Talking regarding to values, I can say that the low values for the first formant and the second formant show that the vowel R is an open mid-back vowel. And the high values for the first formant state that has the characteristic of an open front vowel, which is more open than E. And the differences between North and South, the acoustic analysis showed that there is a better illustration of a rounded R in the North and a bit better illustration of a more open as in the South. It is the most open front vowel, as Kovacs states. I will try next. I will try to see this in our recordings, in the recordings that that we did this summer, to see if it's the same thing or not. So it will be more data for the next presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me. I tried to speak as fast as possible because we are running out of time. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention. Paula.
Okay, thank you, Larissa. Okay.
Going to start the sharing. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me. So after Larissa's presentation, we'll move to a totally different subject. You can hear me, right?
Yes,
can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So just these things look very scattered like this. They will be part of that big volume that we talked about. So about complementation in Istro Romanian, it started with a presentation that Ramona Cătălina Corbeanu had at one of the conferences from last year, I believe, and then another one that we did together this year at the English Department International Conference of the University of Bucharest, something like that, this year. So we started from that. So there's no monograph or like dedicated study to the Istro Romanian complementizer. Of course, we have like general descriptions, for instance, Kovacs or Sârbuie Frățilă. Excuse me, there are a lot of references, of course, to the morphosyntactic system. We took this just as reference. We wanted to answer like some questions, like what's the prototypical complementizer in Istro Romanian and their main morphosyntactic and semantic functions. Now, are there similarities between Daco-Romanian or other Romance varieties and the Istro Romanian complementizing system? And if so, how similar or how different are they? And then third, does this system prove to be novel across Romance or across Eastern Romance? This is connected a bit to what Zvezdana said when she described Neca and Keneca. So we'll have references to that, but more from a Romance perspective, yeah? So let's see. We worked on a corpus. We haven't really had time to take examples from our own recordings because we're still processing them, let's say. Now, standardly in Istro Romanian, we have Ke, which is the similar of Că in Daco-Romanian or that in English, let's say, and Neca, added also by Se. I have a lot of things to say about them, but I think I can just skip them for the sake of being very, very late. I would like just to mention that of these three, Se, which is the descendant of Latin si, to mean if, is the one that's least used. So we may find it after some sort of adverbials in the form of trebuie, like must, have to, something like that. Otherwise, whenever Se occurs, is mostly with the use of dacă in conditional sentences. Moving on, we took a look at some special usages. So the co-occurrence of different complementizer after the same matrix verb that Zvezdana talked about as an influence from Czachavian Croatian. Yeah, so we have here the examples in one. Yeah, el gane kene caldoaie, to give, yeah, something like that. And then in B, ți-am zis kene cal ei cela, I don't know, gospodarul mi-a dat ordin kene ca tot din coase pun. and then zice nekake din podcoade. Yeah, so the last one is nekake as opposed to all the others that are keneka. Now, we don't know yet, we still have to read more literature, but our guess at this point that this may be accidental. So especially if we look at the kind of verb that we have here, like verbs of saying mostly, or reporting verbs like gane, zis, they mean more or less the same thing. And then dat ordin, which is to order. Yeah, so we believe that they typically subcategorize for this ke, and then they select again neka just to show a kind of a subjunctive. Yeah, so maybe we should mention at this point that there are just some traces of subjunctive in Istro Romanian. So mostly where we would mark it morphologically, they would just use neka, and then just let's say something that looks like present indicative, because the subjunctive has special forms, suppletive forms, only for the verb be, fi. Then we have an example also with seke, yeah, verita românul ca și voi, și zisa seke va cuie, yeah, so this is that kind of if in reported speech, yeah, he said that to go with him, yeah, he should go with him, and something like that. So again, we believe in this case as well, like this reporting verb zisa, yeah, he said, just subcategorizes for this if, and then they use just a different complementizer. Now, even if WH phrases are not quite the same as complementizers, yeah, we still decided to take a look at them. And this is a bit standard, like in Daco-Romanian as well. Yeah, maybe not standard Daco-Romanian, but definitely in regional Daco-Romanian, yeah. So, for instance, if we take a look at 2a, întrebat-o am che cum, yeah, so he asked that what the name would be, yeah, che cum lua pure lumele. Also, neka is to be found in a similar context. Again, I have a theoretical description, but I'm just skipping it right now so that we finish a bit on time. Yeah, so all these uses that Zejanski said, you know, they are influenced by the Chekhovian Croatian with which Istro Romanian is in contact with, are different, you know, from the Daco-Romanian standard complementation, and also from other Romans that we know of. So there are situations, you know, like in French, conque, sorry, and in Italian and so on, and there's literature about it, but the situation in Istro Romanian is definitely different, yeah? And here we have one of these uses, like in some sort of coordination, sorry, mesa vatrele și che l-a dat, so came and that gave to him. When I first saw this, I was thinking, you know, when I learned French, and it's like, oh, so if you have like two coordinate sentences, the second one you can use with que and the subjunctive. We believe this is definitely not the case here. And since we don't have a lot of examples, we don't know always if it's just, you know, like a matter of Istro Romanian being oral. So, you know, it's not quite like they have a set rules of standardized answers or typical answers. So this could be something. We believe this could be it. And, you know, the Keneka situation that, just like Zvezdana said, that's an influence of Chekhovian Croatian, but we do not have anything like that. So we may have something also in substandard Romanian or regional Romanian, where we have că and să. So something like mi-a zis că, he told me that, because that would, let's say, the expected complementizer, but then you want to use the subjunctive, so you end up with something like mi-a spus că să vin, or whatever. He told me that I should come, I should arrive. So we think the situation is different. Then Daco-Romanian has the so-called ca ... să construction. Again, this is different. It's not the same situation. Okay. So that was the briefest I could be. Now with some conclusions. So there are three complementizers in Istro-Romanian, the ke, ne, ca, se. Se being the least well represented. So se still is used just in conditional sentences. Now they usually follow a matrix verb, that's expected. Yeah. Then similar to Daco-Romanian, Istro-Romanian has more than one complementizer, while most of Central and Western Romans tend to stick to an equivalent of ke. Nevertheless, Istro-Romanian is different from Daco-Romanian, but as we've seen closer to Croatian, or the dialect of Croatian it's in contact with, because mood selection is not associated with a specific complementizer, yeah, which is the case in Daco-Romanian. So se is the least marked, and it's more used with etymological meaning. I've already mentioned that. Ke is, let's say, the most bleached complementizers, and seems to have like a more general Romance obligatory complementizing nature. And we believe this is one of the reasons why it can co-occur with neca. And then there's neca, which is at the beginning of the process of grammaticalization. Yeah, so it started out as an adverbial marker and then switched to being a complementizer. And the conditional modality can be given by neca alone. Yeah, so neca is used with the value of an imperative. Yeah, and I didn't have any examples, but Zvezdana had a lot of those, so let's make use of those. And then Istro-Romanian data provides a lot of different types of co-occurrences, combination of two complementizers. So rather than being novel, they show that the grammaticalization process, we believe, is still ongoing, given the historical and cultural development of Istro-Romanian. And in the end, we have two situations. I wouldn't put them in the double complementation system of some sort, but they do raise some sort of questions, like the use of che as a question marker or question word or some particle or whatever you may call it. Yeah, ce che noi mes vocile cere, ce che lucram. Again, this situation, to the best of my knowledge, cannot be found in any Daco-Romanian variety, and this is a subject for further investigation. Thank you. Yeah, hvala mušata, or hvala, čuda hvala. Thank you very much, all. And stop sharing. Now I'll leave the floor for questions. Shoot.
My question is not referring necessarily to your presentation, but can you tell us a little bit about your research in Croatia this summer? I think that would be interesting for everybody to hear.
Okay, so it was Adina, Larisa, Catalina, Alexandru, Nicolae, and myself. So we were there for a week, a weekish, let's say. So what we did, thanks to the people that are here with us today, we got access to the Istro-Romanian community. We managed to talk to people, not so many people. So first we went to visit the museum in Șușnevițe, where Viviana is a curator, a very good one. And again, to answer one of the questions that was asked in the chat, so there is a let's say, optional course. So if you go there because the museum functions in the old school in Șușnevițe, so there is like an interactive way of learning if you want. So they have like this standard phrase book, and then a lot of exercises for children. Then they've published like some stories, and you know, like Viviana talked about counterfeiting or bootlegging or whatever it's called. Yeah. So there's that story. Then, you know, like how people used to live. So we found out a lot about those. Then also in Șușnevița, we met one of the guys. I mean, if you go there, you should definitely talk to him. His name is Pepo Glavina. Yeah, he's so passionate, you know, when he talks Istro Romanian, he talks about his family, and he has a very nice approach, let's say, to Romania as well. So no, I won't say that. Anyway, he says Romanian girls are the most beautiful, just to cut it short. So that's what we did. And then, you know, we recorded. We asked their permission to record. But, you know, even if we started with, let's say, we had some things in mind, like we want to find out more about this or that, we ended up just talking. I mean, we're not obviously great speakers of Istro Romanians, but we did our best. So with the little we know and with everything they knew, we tried to make a connection. Then we went to Geana. That's where we meet some of Robert's family and friends. So again, we went to the school in Geana, where they have also maybe not the same kind of museum as in Șușnevița, but let's call it like an exhibition. So you can see there are a lot of things. And Professor Costea's background at some point included those famous zvonciari. So that's like the bell ringers, or I don't know exactly what to call them in English. Anyway, they were really, really interesting. And on top of that, the two people that greeted us there were members of this. So they were zvonciari themselves. And after we had some burvir, some good wine, lots of it. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but it was quite a lot for me, at least, you know, they were very happy to share the songs with us. So that's mostly what we did. And now, I mean, we're not very, I mean, we should do more, but what we're trying to do now is to see how we can use this recording. So now we have somewhere between 15 to 20 hours of recordings. Of course, some of them, you know, maybe if we just moved, let's say, from school to someone's house, we just left the recording on. So maybe some of them are not, I mean, we won't really be able to use like all of our recordings, and that's not even our purpose. So maybe at some point we will make like a database with some recordings, because I think we were really, really lucky and privileged to have talked to those people. So this is what we did.
Thank you. I really appreciated your presentation as much as all the others, but there was a question. I saw a question by Alexander Demer on the chat. Regarding maybe Alexander Demer, you can ask the question about what can this group of researchers do for Alexander? Are you there? Well, the question was, what can this group do?
Here, I'm here, present at work, present la muncă. Okay, yeah, well, a simple idea, I think, Istro Romanian, it's a language in isolation, complete isolation. So the only way to preserve it, to promote it, would be to have a mass media instrument. I'm thinking about Google Translator or DeepL Translator. For example, if I'm writing a text in German, then I'm double-clicking on this text, marking this text, double-clicking on it, and then I have it immediately in English, in French, in Romanian, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, the tools, the artificial intelligence that is reflecting the semantic of a language are very, very advanced today. If you compare a translation of Google 20 years ago and today, it's a huge difference. And I think all the efforts that this community has done, especially you, Ionut, and the ladies from Croatia and Martin and so on, you have a lot of content for these artificial intelligence tools. So putting this, feeding this artificial intelligence programs, application with your knowledge, and because all these tools are self-learning. Once you put them on the road, they develop themselves, they learn themselves, like a chess computer, for example. And that would be a fantastic opportunity into my eyes to have, I'm giving a text in English and then 3 seconds later having it in Istro Romanian, for example. At the beginning, of course, with some hurdles, not perfect, but you can say, oh, this is not correctly translated, the semantic is a little bit different, let's correct it, and so on. And I think this kind of initiatives of programs can be funded by the European Union. I saw the same in Graubünden in Switzerland, or in Tessin, or in north from Trieste, Ladinisch, trying to retranslate in English, Retro-Romanisch, and so on. They have been funded by the European Union. I think it's worth to preserve this diversity. We are talking about diversity at school, and black and white and Chinese and Indians and so on, but we are sometimes ignoring the diversity of this of this material in which can be touched by us, which can be influenced by us. And interesting, let me just a personal reflection. I talked to, because I have some very good experience with Macedonian Romanians from North Greece, from Albania, from North Macedonia. Interesting, the families that have continued to speak the language, to preserve the language, were not the high educated personalities. I think we are 38 people here. Probably all of us, I suspect all of us, have at least an academical education, university degree, PhD, plenty of PhDs here, including my cousin, Professor Costea, and so on. It's the shepherds, it's the very simple guys, the, how to call them, analphabets in quotes, or even analphabets literally. Some of them are not able to write, but they understood and they spoke. So they spoke in the family, this language. For which reason, however, and I think this deserves some admiration, some acclamation. We have to encourage these people. And interestingly, in Facebook, we have several communities where we are communicating in Macedonian Romanian. And it's really a fantastic satisfaction to see. I'm talking to someone from Serbia or to someone from Albania. I don't know a clue about Albanian or Serbian or Greek, but we understand each other in Macedonian Romanian. And that's really a community that was a space there where you have so many communities, so many common things, especially culturally. And I think we have the right and the duty to encourage this. However, with our network, with our efforts. By the way, I'm present on LinkedIn, and I have a very good network. And I'll have now more time for these nice things. I work less. So I'm ready and open to involve myself as much as I can.
Thank you very much. That's indeed like, it could be like a dream come true. Now, on the more pessimistic side, I don't know if there's enough people to do that. And then I don't know exactly, because, you know, linguists are not the same as polyglots. So it could be not the same thing to know things about Istro Romanian than to actually speak it and being able, you know, to have grammatical judgments. And so, but I think there are already some projects, maybe not to this level, but maybe Zvezdana can help out a bit. Yes, Zvezdana?
Just raise my hand. I mean, I started with some of that work more than 10 years ago. So the work I've done for a very long time was mainly documentation and then revitalization of the language. And I was interested also trying to understand why the language is being lost, is disappearing, right, from usage. It's a very tough situation. There are not too many people, and within a small population, there are very few speakers, actually. You know, under 100 speakers in the villages themselves. And very complex to talk about why this happened. You know, we don't have time for that, and I'm not going to go into it, but it's usual processes of modernization, demographic migrations outside of the village. So we did try, and Robert and Viviana were here before. I don't think Viviana is still here. And they were my main contributors in these efforts for a long time. And the fact that you even heard them here read their stories in Vlashki and Zejanski is partially the result of these years of effort to document and revitalize the language. You know, before that, nothing like that really existed. Also, this museum that Viviana now is the curator, the director of in Shushnevica, is something that happened through her efforts in the last few years, but is related to the work that we've done together for many years. So all these things contribute. Also, there is this extracurricular program for children that's still being run in Shushnevica and so on. But there are also a lot of obstacles and a lot of challenges. So I'll tell you just one thing, because again, I'm trying to stay short. But one thing that, for instance, also an obstacle on one level is that these communities are not getting any direct funding for their own work, rather than our work, linguist work. I'm related to these community members. That's part of my family history, but I am still, I don't live in those villages, and I haven't lived in those villages. Even the rest don't live there. So you really need to engage the people who are there on the spot. If you can, they need to be interested. And one way to get them interested was to make it possible for them to have access to funds on their own directly. One of the problems with it is that Istro Romanian is protected by the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages. So it's protected by Part 2 of the Charter. However, for years now, there's been a problem about helping Istro Romanians stay alive through that nominal protection. And the reason for that is that one of the reasons is that Croatian government, which has ratified the European Charter, is connecting the distribution, the allocation of funds to the community to their status, political, legal status. And so, in other words, Croatia only gives such funding to recognized national minorities. However, Istro Romanians, quote unquote, do not want to be a minority. They're not a national minority, right? And they never wanted to be. They haven't really, as far as I know, made such an effort in modern history recently. So, so that's one of the problems. So basically, I actually looked into those documents. I've also wrote a paper about that. The committee which checks the application of the European Charter in different countries that have ratified it, has actually recommended to the Croatian government to separate the national orientation of this community from the support for their language, which should be ensured according to the Charter. But that has not happened yet. You know, the Croatian government just doesn't make a distinction. So that's just one example, one small, but a significant one, because I think the provision of funds would have been helpful for the efforts. And you need to engage the people in the community directly. So sorry for going on for that much time, but I thought that would be interesting because it came up several times.
It is.
May I say something?
Yes, of course.
I'll say very, very interesting comments you have. I'm thinking also about this globalization, which penetrate all the corner of the world. And I'm looking at Romanian, who started a radio show to use okay, nice, and let's go home and other things. But regarding what you said, what about United Nations support? Because I think this is, how to say, a heritage which should be preserved, and maybe they can get support from this side, you know.
I don't think United Nations or UNESCO distribute funds for language protection, and
but should we try to, you know, to make them understand how rich it's the language, you know, area it's made by this this language could which could become archaic very soon, if not.
They acknowledge it because they put it on the list of endangered languages. So
excellent. That I think, you know, if you don't give a try, it's no way.
No, it's already on the, it's on the red list. Yeah. Of,
but yeah, but to ask for support, financial support, they have money.
Yeah, they do have. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Demmer, would you like to add anything? You raised your hand, and I don't know if it's. Yeah. Of course, a short question because we need to close out really soon. Your microphone is off, so I don't know if you want to say anything or not.
Yes,
on November 19, I will make sure that Ionut will send an email to all of you regarding this also, because I don't have everybody's email address, and you will all be invited to this other presentation, Zoom session of ARA, the sixth event of ARA, which is about Hortensia Papadat-Bengescu.
I didn't want to open a discussion about funding, neither by the European Union. So sorry about my formulation in the text. My vision is very simple. You give a language from one generation to the other. You speak it at home, in the family. And that's simple. If this happens, yeah, then you don't need funds from the European Union, etc., etc. Of course, that's welcome. That's additionally perfect. But I think the best solution is to speak it at home, to speak it and to be proud of it. I know Istro Romanian, that's something special. I am special, I'm better, I'm proud of it. You know, if you don't have this, and of course it's politically, economically, and so on. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So,
Alexandru Cărăușu, do you still have something to say?
Yes, 2 minutes. I want, for those who are not Romanian, for the distinguished participants from Oxford and from Rijeka, I want to say something about a Croatian community who lives in Romania. It is the village of Caragiu in the county Caragiu-Severin, around a former industrial city of Reșița. They settled there about 700 years ago, and they live under the symbol of digit 7. There are 7,000 inhabitants of Croatian origin in 7 villages around this city of Reșița. And in 1990, after the big change in Romania, the ethnic minorities got very large rights, and there is a Croatian community who is represented in the parliament. Most outstanding Croat citizen in that village was Mihai Radan. I changed with him several letters, and I watch programs on TVR2 with different minorities, and some of these programs are devoted to the Croats in Caragiu. Thank you very much. Excuse me for being too long.
Kind of late for everybody, so if you don't mind, I think we should call it a day, but not before. I will ask Professor Costea, who's our main host and organizer, to whom I thank again for her kind support throughout the preparation of this workshop, of this mini symposium. I give her the floor, and she will be the, let's say, last speaker in our mini symposium today. Professor Costea?
Thank you, Ionut. It was a very good session, and I will tell you why I think it was an exceptionally good session. The presentations were excellent, and they were at a level that was the level desired by the founders of the American Romanian Academy of Arts and Science, of high quality, of an intellectual level, which is a level that we should be very proud of, a university level. So thank you to all you presenters for excellent presentations. But why I think this session, this Zoom event, was extremely interesting by being a little different than the previous ones that we did, is the fact that it became very interactive. You know, so we had all these comments, all these questions, somehow a difficult subject, because it is a difficult and specialized subject, was able to raise interest from people who are not necessarily linguists. And we had this participation, which gave me a lot of pleasure. The second thing is that we had very young people. So we had a PhD student, and we had some other young people. And we are the American Romanian Academy of Arts and Sciences want to attract the young people, and there you are, Ionut, you were able to bring us some young people interested in participating. At this point, I would like to tell all the presenters that from the part of the President of ARA, you are going to receive a diploma that you made a presentation at this event. Everybody, including Ionut, and I think, to excuse myself for the miscommunication of the council, I'll give him a diploma too, because he also spoke and made a presentation. On the other hand, as a president, interim president of ARA, I would like to offer the possibility of all the presenters to become members on call of ARA for 1 year. And after that, if they want to become permanent members of ARA, we encourage you to do so, but we'll need from you a small CV and CV and a bio note and a picture, and then we are going to have you be approved by the rest of the membership. So I am very pleased, and I think that you've done a great job, Ionut, and I'm grateful to Ileana Orlic to have introduced us. And I told you about, at the very beginning of the session, I told you about the previous events that we have, but now I feel like also telling you about our future event. The future event will be in November, on the 19th of November. It's going to be on a writer, Romanian writer called Hortensia Papadat-Bengescu. Ileana Orlic, are you there? You say a little bit about what this event is about.
Thank you for the opportunity. And Adalina has been doing a great job at organizing all this. And I think it is sad that Papadat-Bengescu is not better known outside Romania. And so there is a translation. I hope more people would be interested in hearing about her and how extremely important and interesting her work is. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Ileana.
My pleasure.
I will make sure that Ionut will send an email to all of you regarding this also, because I don't have everybody's email address, and you will all be invited to this other presentation, Zoom session of ARA, the sixth event of ARA, which is about Hortensia Papadat-Bengescu. I forgot to say, Oana Leonte, I told you, is the editor of the journals of ARA. And we have two journals. We have a scientific journal and we have a humanities journal. So I'm sure that Ioana will agree with me that we would like those who are interested to publish in the ARA journal, please send Ioana a paper, and then it is a peer-reviewed magazine. So we'll have people look at your paper, but please be welcome to send us your paper.
Okay.
Now our Zoom event is towards its end, and before we close, I want to mention 3 people who attended the Zoom event and who are very important because they do extraordinary things for the Romanian community and to propagate Romanian culture. Ileana Northridge, who is one of the organizers of the Hortensia Pengescu Future ARA event, is a professor at University of Arizona, but she also is the honorific consul of Romania in Arizona. We also had with us today Sandru Cetățeanu, who has a literary club called Destine. He lives in Montreal, so he initiates this club from Canada. He has very many members and he has very long sessions, sometimes lasting 6 hours, but other times lasting up to 10 hours. And then again with us today, Theo Stan, who is the founder and leads the organization called Immigration Research Forum, located in Washington. Thank you all for attending the session. Presenters, you are excellent. Those who asked questions, made comments, I appreciate you very much. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.